Hello and welcome to the Comic Conspiracy Podcast, episode 350 for the week of April 10th, 2018. My name is Ryan Higgins, and we have a bunch of people here and a very special guest. Why don't we start to the left? We'll get right into it.
I'm not the special guest, Brock Sager.
That's fine. You're special, but just not the special guest.
I'm going to... really?
You're very special to me, Brock.
I know.
Well, can I be special too?
You're all special.
Thanks, Toby.
You're all my favorite.
Kevin Sharp.
Toby.
And Charlie.
And on the line, we have the most special guest.
See, I knew it.
Scott Snyder, back once again. Scott, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks for having me back, man. I've been looking forward to this.
It's Scott Snyder.
For 2 seconds, I thought we were going to have a live studio audience clap.
It's Scott Snyder, the man that gives us cake and Batman comics. So,
right?
That is a perfect combination.
Yes.
Okay, but you guys didn't pick up the cake, okay? When you walk into the cake place and you go, Comics Conspiracy, they're like, nope. Ryan Higgins, nope. Scott Snyder? And they're like, oh, yeah, we got that one. It's weird.
I was glad that came out, dude. It looked funny. I love that it's like, they're like, what color flowers should we put on this cake with a giant flaming Joker dragon metal head? I'm like, whatever color flowers work, just go for it.
So for people that don't follow or like us on Twitter or anything, what happened was I was on vacation in Seattle, very delayed Christmas vacation, and I just doing my thing on Twitter, messing around while nothing's going on. I was sitting in the hotel room, and a little notification pops up, and I'm like, oh, notification. Oh, from Scott Snyder. Oh, what's this? Oh, hey, I'm going to send you a cake. And I'm like, you're like, where is there a cake place near you that can make it? And I'm just like, I jump on the phone, I'm like, Brock, find me a cake place right now.
And I'm like, he actually didn't call. He text messaged me, find a cake place. What? And then
I'm like replying and talking and then trying to get this all
situated
at the
Scott
same time.
Scott Snyder's getting us a cake. We need a cake place. And I'm like,
no.
Yeah, I'll get to it. I literally waited a little bit because I was taking care of other stuff for the store.
Yeah, these guys were doing the actual check-in.
I'm calling places. I'm like, do you do printed sheet cakes? And one lady was like, princess sheet cakes? I was like, no, printed.
I would have gotten you a princess sheet.
My daughter would have loved that probably.
But the cake we got was very delicious, so thank you, Scott.
Honestly, I mean, the way metal went over with you guys, but with fans, and the fact that you guys supported the series so vehemently from the beginning. I mean, it was Greg's idea too. We just wanted to say thank you to the people that support you guys and come to the store and pick up all our books. So we appreciate it.
Yeah, no, we saw that you send them some cakes to some people, some pizza to people. Man, you just don't see people doing that. So thank you. That means a ton that you guys are thinking about us and the other retailers enough to do something like that. But yeah, I mean, this was all about Metal number 6. We've been kind of holding off talking about the book because we were hoping that lucky enough to get you back on to talk about this. So we want to talk about Dark Knight's Metal. Kind of the whole series, specifically number 6, and then we have questions. So
Sure.
I hope you're ready.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, is I like to talk on this podcast because we do a lot of retail talk, obviously, because I own the store.
In the middle of a store recording this podcast.
My guys all work for me here. The fascinating thing about Metal is just how events just don't do what Metal did. They don't sell more as time goes on. They don't go till 3 or 4 or 5 printings on the one-shot tie-ins. Mm-hmm. They don't have a near 100% buy-in on the tie-ins and crossovers. That just does not happen with big events. Metal bucked every trend that I've ever seen with one of these things. So congratulations, you've now set the highest of standards for every event that comes after it. So no pressure, but this
I
is.
don't know that I'm going to do another one, but thank you. I appreciate it. I hope the question isn't why, because I honestly don't know. I mean, it was really me and Greg and the team in a cave just doing the story that we wanted to do, and we were very nervous that people wouldn't like it and that maybe DC would really sort of balk at it, but again, that's why the cake and the pizza and all that stuff it was really, I mean, it was so deeply gratifying to see people respond the way they did to it, just because it was such a personal story, as crazy as it sounds with all of its lunacy. It was, I think I talked to you about this when I was on last time, because I don't remember if it was just starting or if it was going, right? It was when I was on last time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as zany as it is. It's, it's about what comics mean to me and Greg and all that stuff. So, you know, to see it, people respond to it the way they did, even though it sort of asks a lot of them, just meant the world. So I really feel like, you know, I was very tempted to just be like, let's just retire on this. Let's go out, just go out on this one and just go find other jobs. So.
But where else do you get to write about a flaming Joker dragon being ridden by Batman, like with light armor? No other job's going to let you do that.
Yeah, that was like my initial pitch to Greg when he came over. You know, it was about 2 years ago, really. He came over, it was spring, and I was going to pitch him what we were going to do when he came back from break from doing Reborn. And Dan had said, you know, I want this to be an event, and I had already come up with a story a while before, but I hadn't really told Greg about it. And so when he came over, I had this whole kind of presentation. It was him and Jamie, his wife, and me and my wife, and, you know, it was warm enough that we had, like, you know, I had drinks outside and we were going to relax. And I was like, before we get to anything, I have to pitch you this. And it was me and him standing in my kitchen where I am now. I was like, okay, so it's huge, man. It's going to be a little crazy. It's called Metal. And he was like, stop, I'm in. I was like, no. I have like a whole PowerPoint here, you know? And he was like, no, I'm in. And I was like, well, at least let me tell you, it's going to have like Batman flying on Joker dragons and, you know, Starro. And he was like, no, I'm in. So then we relaxed, and I walked him through the story later, a few hours later, after we'd kind of caught up as friends, and it's been great. So, I mean, it was one of those things where it really was, you know, it was the same way. I mean, every arc on Batman, I always felt like it was like, this could be the one where we're jumping the shark, or 10 sharks, or, you know, this will be my favorite one.
No, that's Plastic Man's fingers, apparently.
Yeah.
Well, you know, with Metal, so much stuff happens in number 6, and you know, we'll start getting the full spoilers here. You know, a question I know we were kind of asking ourselves before recording was, you know, do you feel like there was another issue or two here that maybe some ideas that got kind of truncated or cut a little bit here at the end? Because 6 is so dense with material. Did you want to explore some of these things, or is there the idea here like we're going to explore this in Justice League and in the upcoming titles, and you know we'll kind of leave some of these threads for later? No,
that's a great question. I mean, to be honest, like if I'm being perfectly frank, I mean, I not only am I like new to writing an event, but the whole like ecosystem that is an event was completely alien to me and terrifying, and you know, and there's the story structure of it, which, you know, I felt like when I did Death of the Family, or I did some of the other stories that tied into Bat books, I could just focus on my book, let the other books do whatever they did, and, you know, support them, but not depend on them, and not sort of, I didn't need to consider them quite as much. With Metal, and that was actually something I learned to do I learned to do the opposite of that on Death of the Family, where one of the things it was one of my favorite stories, you know, that I've done in my life, and I'm deeply proud of it. But I don't remember if we talked anything we've talked about before. Please stop me. I don't want to be boring or repetitive to your listeners, but
no, not at all.
That was the first time I really understood sort of the economic impact of doing things that were tied together, because the main story of Death of the Family did really well, and the tie-ins did really well commercially. Critically, the main story did really well, and we finished, and it was sort of like, you know, the ending went over well. And then there was this kind of backlash, this kind of wave that came that was almost like, well, you didn't kill anybody, you didn't have big repercussions and this kind of stuff. And I was so shocked by it. And it was the first time I really got hit by, like, hit sort of from the left where I didn't see it coming, you know, like hit from the right. I just didn't see I don't mean left politically or right politically. I mean, I just didn't see it coming from the field. I didn't see it. You know, on the horizon. And it really was because when I look back, I realized people had bought hundreds of dollars worth of comics, and the hype around it had been death, 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 death. And now reading it in trade, now that it's removed from that context and that kind of, that whole sort of environment, I'm really proud of how it goes over, and, you know, and all of that stuff has kind of vanished. But that scar, I mean, that was very hard at that moment where I realized, Jesus, I really might have let people down by not having bigger consequences. But I never considered it an event. I just considered I only had 5 issues. It was like a 5-issue story.
Well,
so with Metal,
I remember talking to people about this who had similar comments about that, and I said, well, the mistake that they were making is it's not death in the family, it's death of the family, and that's a very different thing.
But it's the fact that particular title kind of ties back to a big monumental part of Batman's past.
Sure.
So it created this whole idea of a expectation that it would kind of line up. And for good or bad, when people's expectations aren't met, there does tend to be a little bit of a backlash because
100%, and rightly so. Yeah. There's no criticism from me towards fans for that at all. I mean,
no, but
I just wasn't aware, being in the eye of the storm with it, meaning I was still green. I mean, it was my second story on Batman. I just didn't understand at that point that, that buildup that happens in your peripheral vision while you're doing a story like that. Because I never thought of it as an event. I just thought of it as a Joker story.
Yeah.
And
I can't even fathom that was only your second story.
Yeah. I was terrified. Now I'm like,
third if you count Detective, right? But
but Detective was a real incubator because it was Dick Grayson. It was really easy to write when you're scared and terrified and excited to write Batman because he feels the same way to be Batman. And B, it was an incubator because I was around Jock and Francesca, who I was friends with, so there was a kind of and Grant, I had cover fire from, Grant being on Batman, who was the main sort of moving target for everybody with whatever he was doing. So I
just always remember back to that I already kind of considered you one of the top in the industry at that point. Like you had already fully established yourself to be only on your second story in my mind.
Well, I mean,
I have not gotten there in my own mind yet. So, but go ahead.
We've now had this happen twice. Okay. I remember when New 52 launched. We actually started this podcast right before New 52. Yep. And I remember when New 52 launched, I was like, yeah, that Scott Snyder guy, they're giving him Batman. That's crazy. I really liked his run on Detective, but that's a big jump. Well, I hope he can do it. Good luck, right? When they announced Rebirth, and I'm like, Tom King, they're giving Tom King Batman. That's a big shoe to fill, like coming off Scott Snyder. Can Tom King do it? And I'm like, you guys have written like the 2 best arcs of Batman, easily, like the modern day. But then you go from Grant Morrison. It's just like Batman has had just the most insane tier of creators over the last decade.
Is that Detective run Black Mirror?
Yeah.
Was that it?
Yeah.
Because anybody who thinks of Scott's Genesis point on Batman as the Greg Capullo issues, seek out that Detective run, because that is really, really good. And the art is fantastic, and it's a really dark story. I wish Dick Grayson had stayed as Batman longer. I thought it was a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Obviously,
he
you
was
bring
supposed
Bruce
to.
back.
That was the whole thing. I mean, I was going to do to understand like where how I landed on Batman. I mean, I was just doing the backups on Detective, and Paul Dini was doing the features. And then Paul Dini left to do stuff, I don't remember, at Marvel or somewhere, and they said, kid, do you want the whole thing? And I was like, I'll take it. And then I was, horrified, terrified, but I knew I had a story I wanted to do. But at the end of that, I was just starting to feel confident enough to be like, okay, I can do this for one more year. Maybe let's see how it goes. With Dick Grayson in the suit, I had another thing, another story in mind. And then all of a sudden they were like, no, Bruce is coming back, and would you move to Batman? Just switch with Tony. And I was like, okay, Tony Daniel. All right, I'll switch. It's no big. I can do it. But let me stay with Jock and Francesco and everything. And they're like, fine. And then as the New 52 developed around it, and they realized it was going to be a number 1, and they got Greg over, and they told me they had him, and I couldn't work with Jock and Francesco. I mean, I was terrified to the point that I really almost quit, where I was like, I am not ready for this spotlight. Like, I am the indie band that got like dragged into the Super Bowl, halftime show. And the hard thing is honestly, Batman has always been my favorite character, and the idea that I always planned on maybe I will do a few runs on characters that I really like a lot, and I love. but that will prime me so that when I eventually get to do a Batman backup, or I eventually get to do a Batman short story, an 8-pager or something, I will be ready to do that, And instead they were like, come here, kid, your first gig. Let's go right out on Batman #1. I was just like, it was terrifying, mostly because I was so scared that I was going to let down the character. This was my favorite character, and I wasn't good enough yet to do it, And I was like, it was like being put on the Super Bowl stage when you've just learned to play your instrument, all right, you know what I mean? And you're just getting the hang of it. So, I mean, I'm so grateful that it went over as well as, I gave it everything I had, and I'm very glad it went over as well as it did. But it's been a crazy ride with this stuff. So each arc has been like, all right, this is the one, I'm going out on. This is the one, this is the one where they'll realize I'm a big fraud, and that's the end of it.
Well, with metal, there's been a lot of talk. Again, we were kind of talking here and some talk online of a lot of.
Oh wait, you know what? I'm sorry. I totally got lost in the corn maze in my own answer. Let me just finish let me answer what you asked, actually, which is.
I don't even remember what I asked anymore.
Right.
It was about the 6th issue being stuffed.
Oh yeah.
Right. What I was going to say is that basically with metal, I was extremely conscious of doing the opposite of what I did in something like Death of the Family, where I'm equally proud of both books when you stand them alone, like Metal and Death of the Family. But the last thing I wanted to do with Metal was make you feel like it didn't sort of exceed the math of what it was supposed to be. So Death of the Family, I didn't see it as any kind of event. I just saw it as a Joker story. And, if it was that, I would stand by it, 100%. As an event, if I knew that it had so many tie-ins, and if I could go back and sort of, I would make sure that those tie-ins didn't sort of send the message that they did, and I changed the title, all that kind of stuff. With Metal, I was just like, how do you balance it? How do you balance it so that there's enough tie-ins, enough, miniseries, enough actual metal, that it at once feels relevant and big and fun, and yet doesn't overwhelm anybody and doesn't feel financially like a burden, all of that stuff. So, all of it was just brand new frontier for me. And I had DC saying, at first they always come around, and they're always very supportive, especially Dan in the end. But at first, I was like, I want to call it metal. And they were like, that doesn't mean anything. What is metal? And, it might be a legal issue with heavy metal. And, and I was like, no. And they were like, well, this thing sounds like it's too much to fit in, 8 issues. Make it 2 events over 2 summers. And the first one will be the Evil Batman, and the second one will be the Dark Multiverse. And I was like, no. It has to be me and Greg doing all of it at once, and that's it. And, it was just scary because you go into it being like, you don't know if you're right. I didn't know if it was going to bomb. And the thing I'm getting at is that, I tried to be very conservative about not letting them do too much with the event aspect of it, and then gaming the end so that it had tremendous consequence, because I wanted you to feel throughout like you got more than you paid for from day one. That was my goal. And on top of obviously the bigger goals of making it personal and making it good. But I wanted you as a customer to walk away feeling like, boy, I paid for that, and I got double what I thought. And the other thing that I just point out is that, when you go out there and you have to pitch an event and pitch, the selling points of it, you don't just go out there and say, hey, listen, it's going to be fun. It's this and this. I had to go on a stage in front of all the different departments of DC and Burbank. It's like marketing and publicity and collected editions and foreign rights and just everybody, like a room. And you're there and you're realizing, looking out at this crowd, that these people's jobs depend on how this does, and so it's scary. Not that they're going to get fired if it does poorly, but they're all buying in. Like the people that do the pins and the merchandising at cons, the people that do promotional material for it, the people that wind up collecting it. So there's such a giant sort of machine around it that, you just, all of those decisions become freighted, and you have to kind of be like, for me at least, I had to be like, what is the most sort of bang for your buck way I can do this story for everybody, for the customer, for the retailer, for the people there, and still at heart make it exactly what I wanted it to be in spirit, what it's about. So I definitely erred on the side of like, I would rather leave you feeling like, wow, that a lot hit me at once, than have you feeling it was decompressed, or that any issue was a ripoff of anything. So that was like my complete North Star and compass going into it, with Dan and Jim and Jeff and everybody, just saying, I want this to feel like everybody's like, this could be another 20 issues, but I don't want to make it that. So,
well, I know you worked with Grant Morrison, a bit kind of towards the end on this, and I have, there's a bit of feeling of his style kind of in that last issue, because he's definitely one of those writers that, like, he's not wasting any pages. He only tells you what he needs to tell you, and like, there's a lot of stuff going on in that 6th issue, and again, I think from the Wild Hunt issue, I feel a little of that influence there. I'm not sure if that was intentional or what, but I feel like, yeah, especially with the multiverse and the Monitor and everything going on in that issue, I definitely felt Grant's influence there. So I don't.
I
don't know if that's
Grant.
If you
Grant's
did that on purpose,
actual,
but
yeah, I mean, he's like my spirit animal with this event. But he also. I mean, he's become like a genuine friend, which is, I can't even believe I'm saying that, but that's true. And so, I spoke to him a number of times, both just on a personal level about, he asked me, he was like, he's like, so what is it about, Scott? What's it about? Before we began. And I was like, this is what it's about. I mean, from a personal standpoint, metal is about sort of venturing out of your comfort zone, or going past what you think you're capable of in an ambitious way, and then suddenly finding that not only have you failed, but that you've reached a point in your life where everything from here forward will only be worse from the juncture that you're at. And everywhere you look, you just see failed versions of yourself. And, I've certainly been at those points in my life many times. And, the story is about sort of needing people to help you get through that to the other side. And then once you're through, reaching farther next time. The way that sort of pertains to comics, and why it's sort of a crazy comic event and not sort of a memoir, is that for me, especially as a kid, a lot of the things that got me through rough periods were the most bombastic, lunatic comics that I thought were sort of escapist, but weren't actually escapist. When you read Infinity Gauntlet, that's a deep story about mortality. I mean, when you have Thanos courting death and wanting to romance and win death, and like there's very sort of there's very resonant and deep sort of feeling to Starlin stuff, to Whedon stuff, to a lot of the stuff that you go back and you read and you thought, I just love that as a kid because it was crazy and fun. And I wanted metal to be that, in that way. So I don't know. For me, the fact that people responded the way they did just means a lot, because it is a deeply personal story in that regard. But it's almost like that thing at the center of like 1,800 coatings of candy and crazy, so it's a little bit buried.
So how exactly did the sort of tie-ins and stuff come about in this? Did you have an idea of sort of what stories you wanted somebody to tell, or did somebody have to come pitch to you? Or
well, and I think Kevin had a similar question along the same line.
Well, Scott, I can even tie this into Charlie's. You gave me an opening here to get to my granular process question. So you're on the stage at Burbank pitching this. So in between the pitch and you actually typing the first word of script, how detailed is this laid out? Do you have a master outline for the whole series? Do you have outlines for the individual issues? How much kind of runway do you lay down before you even start actual story script?
Well, with this, the more you give them, the better they feel. So I gave them a ton, and I didn't understand that at first because, when I first started working at DC, I pitched everything down to the letter. I mean, I'm a big planner. I definitely off-road a lot. Like, I'm pitching something for the second arc of Justice League now, that they want to make. This is totally something I probably shouldn't say, but they want to they like the story enough that they want to kind of boost it a little bit. And have it tie into other things. So I pitch it, and I just pitch it verbally, and I'll say, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'd like to do. And, but I plan it. I'm very I need to know where I'm going. I need to know the ending. I need to know the major beats.
Yeah, you've seen his whiteboards, right?
Yeah.
Those things are intense.
Right. And then sometimes in the middle, I'll kind of sort of, decide that I want to take different routes, and once in a while, like, you get to the end and realize you have a slightly different sort of take on it, but it's rare. Whereas I have other friends, Tom is one of them, but another guy, Owen King, who really find their way as they're writing a lot more, which is, everybody has their own process, and I love talking to other writers about how different theirs are. And as a teacher, one of the things you kind of learn to do is teach people to kind of respect their own path with that. Mm-hmm. But with me, I planned a lot. I had every issue kind of laid out, and there were things that I veered away from when I got to the script, to the actual scripting. But what I learned very quickly was, like, when there's that much financial burden on it, and that much they decide they're going to bank on it and make the pins and make the shirts and all that stuff, the more you give them that makes them feel better, the more they'll get enthusiastic and support it. So the less you give them, the more they totally freak out. So it was an amazing, it was really a learning curve. Because there was a certain point, we were nearing the beginning. Like, I had scripted issue 1, and I had given them kind of my normal kind of outline. And I just sensed this kind of anxiety whenever I went out there. Like, when I did this pitch, and I own one suit. It's my wife, Charles Sewell, actually, when I went with him to Washington last time, he was like, I'm taking you clothes shopping for your birthday, you asshole. You have one suit and you wear it everywhere and it's black. And he's like, I know it's for weddings and funerals and that's it. So I was like, yeah. So I'm out there in my suit pitching to them and stuff, and I can see them getting more and more anxious, and I'm like, and this, and Joker Dragon's this, and da-da-da-da this. And what you realize is you can pitch them, the things you think are cool for story, but when they see the document and understand what month each thing hits, and they say, oh, this is where you introduce the Batman who laughs. Well, that's an asset. This is where you introduce that the Joker's in it. Okay, that's an asset. Each of these things, it's a different machinery. I'm in there to be this is what I want to do. This is what it means to me. This is what I care about. But you learn over time to kind of grow and say, I understand that these people's jobs and their livelihood and the things that they get passionate about have to do with, how they can take aspects of the story and use them in their departments in that way. And they're great at it. So, yeah, it was really, I had to have a very detailed plan to answer your question. And just to go back to the thing about Grant. Yeah, so Grant talked to me throughout, and also Neil was wonderful. And even Frank Miller, when I told him, he was like, I saw him at the Christmas party, the DC kind of Christmas dinner in New York. And I can't believe I'm uttering these words, but we're friends. I've hung out with him a few times, so at least we're friendly, I would say. And he was like, this metal thing, this thing you're doing, metal, whatever. And I was like, well, funny you should mention it, because I really want to bring in the Dark Knight at the end. And he was like, in what capacity? And I told him, and he was like, I like it, kid. Go for it. Yes. And then Dan was like, that is not official. You have to get written approval. You can't drink. There's drinks at this table. We're all and he's not drinking. So I was like, he's drinking water. And he was like, you're drinking. You need written approval. I don't want to hear about it. So I got it
scribbled on a napkin.
So one of the things I'd say is that metal, again, was such a great experience in terms of turning to people who had written stories that had inspired you, had inspired me, I guess, both growing up and also as an adult, and had done these big events or had done things that were such seminal touchstones in comics, and then approaching them to use some of those pieces, Sandman or, elements of Final Crisis or Dark Knight and all of this. And to a T, everybody was like, go for it. You have my blessing. All of it. It was just such a great sort of energy around, they always say don't meet your heroes. And then when the people that you look up to are so wonderfully giving with their creations, it was just a terrific experience in that regard as well.
Well, so I don't hijack this and make it an interview about writing process. Charlie, I stepped on your question earlier about the...
Well, no, I was just curious about one of the things that really stood out to me about this event is just how strong all the tie-ins were, how none of them really felt wasted. All of them felt like there was sort of a worthwhile story to tell. So I'm just curious how much of that was you kind of saying, these are the tie-ins I want and these are the tie-ins I don't want. How much of that was people pitching to you? I was just curious what the process there was and how you're able to kind of keep everything feeling very cohesive and sort of, as you said, not overdo it, but not underdo it at the same time.
Well, it was a bit of both. I mean, I was definitely, I oversaw all of it. So I read everything before it went out, which was exhausting and exciting and, inspiring all at once. Metal, it was a lot. Like it was definitely sort of, some people like Frank Thierry and Pete Tomasi, when they handed stuff in too, we're all friends. So they were like, do you want to help dialogue it? You want to do this? So, I mean, I was very involved in certain ones, and other ones I tried to be a little bit more hands off. And then, but the skeleton key to it was when I pitched it, I said, I definitely did say, here are the things that I think could work, like a Gotham Resistance, the one shots, we could do a Bats Out of Hell kind of thing. And I would pitch the basic beats and then say, who wants to do it? And do you want to go back and forth? Do you want to collaborate on it? So Metal was like just a deeply collaborative experience in that I didn't want to field stuff out the way I did on Death of the Family, where I was like, do whatever you want. Let me see it when it's done, and I'm sure it's going to be great. And all those tie-ins I was super happy with, but I didn't oversee. Here, it wasn't like I wanted to say, hand me it so I can criticize it, or I wanted to be like, let's work in tandem so that everything you're doing, I don't repeat in Metal, but what I do, you don't repeat, and we can build on each other and create mystery. So we had multiple summits in Burbank where, my biggest sort of teammates on this were obviously Josh Williamson and James Tynan, who's like, they're brothers to me. But James and I go back like 10 years now. And James will be helping me on some of the Legion of Doom and Justice League stuff as well. And Josh kind of in the mix a bit as well. But with this, it really was making sure that everybody felt excited about the pieces they were working on and talking to them as they went. So with the Dark Knight stuff, for example, when Frank was working on Murder Machine, it's about calling him and saying, and Frank is a character. I don't know if you know Frank. I love Frank. Like the best story about Frank Thierry, like if you want to know who like Frank is, God, I shouldn't tell this story, but I'm just gonna
too late now.
Just tell Ryan to edit it out.
I can tell you two stories about Frank Thierry.
Excellent.
Am I totally like? Is this not what you want me to do?
No, do whatever.
Or is this? I never know. I'm always just like, is this the stuff that's like going to ruin this interview, or is this the stuff that you?
No, you're the indie punk band who's just riffing right now. It's great.
Okay, cool.
I thought we were just having a
So
chat.
my Frank Thierry story. Well, I have two, but my first one is that, and maybe I'll just tell one for now. But many years ago, like when I was first starting out, back at this time when I first started on Batman, it was like 1 year maybe into Batman, maybe 2 years. It was around Death of the Family or so around then. And I had a very hard time, adjusting to the popularity of the book, the pressure on the book. I really didn't expect any of it. So all of the stuff that kind of came that you would be excited about, it was very, I know it sounds like, poor me and my diamond shoes are too tight and so on. But I just wasn't prepared for it. So, I had a very hard time, especially at cons. And so I would drink too much and I would go out and be a little bit too, I had a lot of anxiety. I started seeing somebody more often, taking more meds, all that stuff. I was trying very hard to manage it. But at cons in particular, I just didn't handle it well. I hated going on stage. I love it now. I'm very comfortable with it. But at the beginning, it was a lot more than I ever was ready to do, and I didn't know how to manage it. And so we were at a con and Frank was there and we went to a comic industry or comic store party And we were walking in, and the bouncer was just very hostile. And my wife was with me. And he was like, I was trying to explain. I was like, we're supposed to be in there because
don't you know who I am?
No. It wasn't like that at all. I was just trying to explain to him. I was like, no, we're on the list, and we're supposed to be in there because they're actually selling some of our books, and this is a comic party. And he was like, no, if you don't, it's like $50 to get in. And I was like, well, I'll pay the $50, but I'm telling you, we're on the thing. And and he was sort of like, he was just like, my wife tried to explain, and he was like, I'm not talking to you, sweetheart. That kind of thing.
Oh.
And I was just like, what the fuck did you just say? And I was like, and this guy would have murdered me. And I'm not, I'm like, I'm not like, I'm not tiny, but I'm also like, I'm like a fraction of this dude. And, I'm like, but I have a very bad temper, and I was sort of like, in just this bad place where I was, not just, I was still a baby, and I was just like, what did you say? Da, 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 da. And this guy's looking at me like he's going to squash me. And Frank, all of a sudden this guy taps the guy on the shoulder, and he goes, and if you don't know Frank, he has like the last Brooklyn accent, like in Brooklyn, where he's just like, he looks like a Dick Tracy character, basically. I love him for that. He's just sort of like, he's like, listen, he's like, I want you to know, you fight this man, you fight two men. I was just like, who are you? Like, I love you. So no, Frank Thierry, he's one of the most loyal and wonderful people in comics, and he's very talented as well. Right. And my other story with him, I'll hold off so we can get to more metal things. But we've been friends a long time, and the point is, like with Murder Machine, again, it was bringing somebody in who wanted to talk about it and say, not what do I want. I'd give him very light things. I'd say, look, I'd give everybody the fear. I'd say, this is what Batman's afraid of in this one. This is why this is a Dark Knight. This is the fear that he loves Alfred so much, and he's such a daddy's boy at this point that he won't be able to give up Alfred, and he'll turn him into sort of an abomination on the other side. So, roll with that. What do you think? I'd give him a couple beats to tie into in metal, and then we'd go back and forth. He'd do it on the phone, give me an outline. So, I love that process, and I hope everyone left happy. I feel like, the people that we worked with on metal had a good experience, and I certainly had a good experience with them. So it was a very good chemistry, and I think that's the key. The thing I'd say to anybody that, like all those people out there planning comic events in the future, I think the greatest thing about it was when you lean into the idea of like letting go of some of the really meaty pieces if you don't need them. Because there's nothing in those. I could have made metal 25 issues easily, with just metal and the one shots, and written half of that and been fine. But yeah, it was a scary time too. You guys, I think a lot of it was there was a reaction against some of the stuff, the event stuff, as much as it was doing well, like Secret Empire, and I love Nick, and I like that story a lot. There was sort of a reaction against the idea of events at that moment and how long it was, and so I was very scared of that. I tried to make it so that it was like everything you get feels more for your money than you paid. And that was it. That was like my goal.
Well, I guess that applies also to the stuff coming out afterwards, because we have Terrifics, we have Immortal Men. Well, more so than that. What was the other one? I was just thinking about it too. Challengers, yeah. So, and Hawkman. When you're pitching, you're like, I want to bring Hawkman back, and we're going to do something with it afterwards, or you just like, I just want to bring Hawkman back, and then whatever, figure it out.
Well, it depends on which one. The New Age of Hero stuff was really sort of its own beast. So it was very much like, you tie in however you want. I just don't have the bandwidth to sort of manage those. So it was really those were sort of ideas pitched that had a loose connection to metal that made sense. Some of them more tightly, some of them less. And I just gave them the pieces of metal and said, I gave them the story and said, whatever you want to do, as long as I don't contradict you, you don't contradict me, go for it. I'm happy to support you. And
because something like Terrifics doesn't exist without metal, that specific team up. So that did you write the first issue or second issue and they're like, yeah, let's do more with this?
that was really just me and Lemire as friends. He was like, I want to do a series that sort of lets me explore sort of DC science, and I love Plastic Man. And I was like, well, he plays this role in Metal. Do you want to use him in Mr. Terrific? And he came up with such a great idea for that book that one in particular was a pretty intimate, kind of like,
okay.
I was in Toronto for a con and we were just hanging out at his studio, and he started pitching me, and I'm like, well, you have an on-ramp from Metal, so just do it. Yeah. Whereas other ones like Hawkman were much more planned, because Hawkgirl and Hawkman both have, really big roles and everything coming up post-Metal. In Justice League, Hawkgirl is in Justice League, and the Hawkman book that Robert Menditti has planned sort of crosses us at certain points. So that was a little bit more sort of solidly planned ahead of time.
All right.
Well, I mean, basically, for going back real quick to the tie-ins for Metal and the one-shots and stuff, I think when, at least I was reading through it, when we went to like the Gotham Resistance and then Bats Out of Hell, it didn't interrupt the books that they were originally in, which I think a lot of...
Yeah, the arc finished.
The arc finished.
There was the one shot.
And
then the next arc started.
So it didn't really interrupt something that was going on in the book. And I know that was a problem a lot of people have had with some events in the past.
Well, the way I see this, and I know DC has been really, really good with this even in the past with stuff like Blackest Night and that kind of stuff, is it didn't feel like the event had to put everything else on hold.
Yeah.
Like everything else was still sort of moving and Metal was moving, and where you end up all kind of works, but it doesn't feel like it's taken over the books that people were like. It didn't take over Aquaman. It didn't take over Flat. Like those books continued with the stories they were trying to tell.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's believe me, like it is a fraught equation when you're in it, because you don't know. Like I got people complaining that we weren't taking over more books, and then I got people
can't please everyone.
There was all kinds of back and forth. I mean, there was nothing. Believe me, there were 10 more evil Batmen I would have created. There was easily another 50 pages I would have put in Metal. And it was funny because Greg, again, I don't know if I'm talking too out of school, but Greg and I were just in Washington D.C. together, and for his birthday, and then we were just in Dallas together again. We've been together like 3 weekends in a row. But we were talking about Metal and how well it went over, and how grateful we were. And I was kind of giving a toast on his birthday to it. And it was just me and him and his wife and the inker John Glapian, his wife, and stuff. And he said, he was like, everyone's supposed to hate events and blah blah blah, and we were all happy. And then at the end of it, he was sort of like, and there were some things that we do different next time, but blah blah blah. And I was like, Greg, the stuff that you're saying that we would do different next, like this was our first, time out. Like, of course, but next time might be totally different. Meaning the context of it matters hugely. That's one of the things that, I don't know, maybe I'm too sensitive to that. It might be something that, with an event like this, I'm too reactive to. I don't know. But I try very much to think about myself as a customer at that moment, meaning like when, and what's in the zeitgeist in this. Cause here, the truth of the matter is this, like the story that we're doing in Black Label, me and Greg, could easily be Metal 2. Like it is basically Metal 2, like Metal 2 death metal. Like, I could pitch it to DC as that. But the reason I don't do it as that is because we've done it. And I worry that as much as it would be a financial boon at this point and all that stuff, it wouldn't be as exciting as what we're trying to do with it as a Black Label book, where we're demanding of each other different things, where we're not on the same kind of grind. We can do different kinds of art, all that stuff that, we can bring to the table that we haven't done. And so I was just saying to him, I was like, dude, if you don't think that this event, like, I'm looking at all the math and I'm sure getting a lot wrong, but trying to be like, right now people feel this way. This story that was Metal could have been an arc in All-Star Batman. It could have been an arc in Batman. It could have been, but when it's an event, you adjust it to those, you turn the knobs to make it something that you think, okay, well, events have certain demands. how do I meet those and still tell the same story that I love and make it something I'm proud of to make the best event we could possibly make, as opposed to being like, well, it was kind of planned as a Vertigo book or as a this. Let me just tell it that way and call it an event. Because then everyone's going to be like, well, this wasn't an event. This was, so, or keep it as what it was meant to be originally. For me, this was always meant to be an event. It was, Dan told me, when Greg left and I had the kind of seeds of the story, when he comes back, I want you to blow it out. I want you to do like blow the doors off, big event. So from the moment, organically, that's what it always was. But, a story like the Black Label story has always been planned as that.
Yeah.
But DC, if you don't think they're kind of like, you could do a metal too with that. But I'm like, no, this is, I would have to change. I could do it easily. I promise you, not easily, but I mean, I could change. I know better now. I could be like, I'm more familiar with how to do an event. I could turn the knobs and say, okay, well, here are the tie-ins. Here's this, here's that.
Well, if they sucked, people would be like, why are there so many tie-ins? I don't like these. I don't care. I don't want to read this. If they're good, people are like, I want more. But you want to leave them wanting more, right? I mean, you don't want to just, because, as great as metal was, those tie-ins and those one-shots would not have sold as well per issue if there was 50 or 60 of them. They just wouldn't. I mean, it's just out of the price range of most people.
Well, being on the retail side of it, metal was, I think, the first event, at least that I've worked during, that I could sell the tie-ins to people because of just what they were, right? There was the one-shots were the individual stories about the Dark Batman, and then you had these side stories with, Gotham Resistance and Bats Out of Hell, and then there was the couple random here and there, but I could sell it easier to people.
I don't want to take away from what metal did well, but I kind of felt like a lot of that blueprint kind of also worked very well with Blackest Night, in the way that there were tie-ins and there were like the sort of character books and stuff, but it didn't feel like, it felt like you got what you were expecting to get out of each of those issues and each of those tie-ins, and it worked very, very well within sort of that confines.
But back to what Ryan was saying about...
And let me just say one quick thing, which is that during the year that I did All-Star Batman, what I was doing on the side was all the homework of reading every event in like comic book history. And,
nice.
No, I'm not kidding. And one of the things I fell back in love with reading all of them was that comic ridiculousness and that giant, bombastic, fun, over-the-top storytelling. And out of all the events like that I read over that year, Blackest Night was easily right towards the top for those very reasons. Like Blackest Night was a huge model in that regard. And Jeff was very influential. I mean, Jeff, because he was doing Doomsday Clock, he had me out there. It was January, so it was a year plus ago, right when I was sort of gearing up to start writing metal. And he was like, come out, just you and me. We won't go to the office. I want you to come to my house. Don't even tell them you're coming, and we'll lay it all out on a big whiteboard. And I'll do Doomsday Clock and you do metal, and we'll make sure we're not repeating stuff and all of that. And he was very, very helpful about like, certain beats and how to elevate them and all of that. But point being, Blackest Night and, what that did was a very, very big influence in the DNA of metal to make every tie-in. Like the Batman one that from Blackest Night I loved. But similarly, like Flashpoint had ones like that too. And, the Batman one there that Azzarello and Russo did was fantastic. And I loved working on the Project Superman one. And there were so many ones that I enjoyed from that as well. So that sense of just getting the sense that like when people hate, I mean, I tried to, DC Publicity actually got mad at me, not mad, but they were like cease and desist when I was kind of like posting joking images of, things from metal, but it was always the tagline was sort of like, we all know events suck kind of stuff. It was like months before it started, where it was like Superman burning something into a rock with where he's kind of looking, he's kind of using his X-ray vision to see what's inside Challenger's Mountain, but it looks like it's heat vision. And the thing I wrote, I made it kind of a meme or whatever, and I was like, it's Superman saying, he's like burning something, and Aquaman's like, Clark, why are you burning that message into the rock? Comic events, suck, whatever. And he's like, everyone knows that already. And Clark was like, they must never forget. And they came at me and they were like, "Stop it! You don't have to counter program yourself. Just go for it," But I was just very, very concerned with that idea that the events that work, like the Blackest Night, people, you're asking them to spend $100, on stuff or more, and people it's like nobody's rich, going into comic stores and everything. Me neither, I'm like, DC pays me really well now. It's not that, but I mean, as a comic fan, when I was there on the other side of the fence, and I went with my dad, you're saving your allowance to go. And when you buy an event then, and you're going to be like, okay, well, I don't normally buy this book, but I'm buying it because it's part of it. The events that have done the best are the ones that say, this leaves you wanting so much more. So Metal, that was again, one of the real sort of tenets that we passed around. It was like, nothing feels superfluous. Or if it does, it was not meant to.
No, you did a great job making sure that everything felt like it belonged.
During your homework year, when you're rereading all those events, I know you cited Blackest Night and Flashpoint, which are two more recent ones. Anything jump out? Any surprises where you say, wow, I didn't remember this being so good, or I never read this the first time around? Anything jump out that you remember?
There were a few. I mean, Secret Invasion was one that I wasn't that long ago, but I didn't remember really getting into. But the idea of the groundwork that was laid in advance was where I really took a lot of that, where you realize people want to be rewarded for the stuff that they've been reading. And, I had thought of Metal long before in different forms. Even when I was doing Death of the Family and that stuff, I started to come up with the idea of a thing that was passed from Hawkman to Batman. So there were clues of that mystery as I started to set it up, hoping I'd get to do it in some capacity. And then it evolved bigger and bigger and bigger into Metal. So, that kind of a thing like Secret Invasion sort of taught me. People love going back and seeing, oh yeah, I read that and now it's relevant now. And so I said, okay, well, let me point out all the places where I seeded things that could have been part of Metal, meaning like they were, but I didn't have the ending. I didn't have it completely figured out, but I knew I wanted to do a story that worked through Metals and that Hawkman passes to Batman and has to do with Barbatos. The Dark Multiverse I figured out when I was doing Endgame, that kind of stuff. So, you learn different lessons from each one. In that regard, Secret Wars was huge. Hickman's Secret War. I reread Hickman's whole run on Avengers. The Omnibus, like 1,000 pages plus, just to get that sense of scope and grandeur and how could I sort of approximate that in my own way without. And for Justice League 2, it was really helpful reading Avengers. But that sense of just looking at things that sort of embrace the medium completely. Kirby being the best example. I went back and, I was reading the King of Comics biography, all that stuff with the Neil Gaiman introduction, just embracing the form and saying, this is supposed to be fun and it's supposed to be huge and it's supposed to break your mind with like the silliness of it sometimes and yet be deeply, deeply affecting emotionally. And so, going back and again, reading a lot of the stuff that I thought, oh yeah, I love that because it was so silly. When you go back and you read it, it's not silly. Like there's actually like really deep and relevant and sort of poignant messages in the stuff, It's like even like looking at Star Wars and being like, oh, it's so escapist, and then thinking it's during the Cold War, the Empire, all the obvious stuff. That it's clearly what's in the zeitgeist and what somebody is wrestling with, whether it's about just personal demons, like Metal is more about that, or things that are happening in the world at that moment. So, it was really an interesting year. It was very fun because All-Star Batman was so prismatic. It was so just sort of, can I try these crazy angles on Batman and do stories with different artists, and can I flex different muscles while Tom is doing the great stuff that he's doing in the main book? Can I sort of be the outlier a little bit? And it got me embracing the fun of it and the silliness because I didn't have the same commercial pressures. That job doing Batman, and, Tom is one of my closest friends, and I'm very, very, very proud of everything that he's been able to do on Batman. And also just the fact that he's so different than what we did, like that it's really apples and oranges. And that was what I said when he came on too. There's that idea that, please don't, just do your own thing, and then nobody will even compare you to what we did anyway. The same way Grant and us are just apples and oranges, and you like one, you might not like the other, you might like them both, it doesn't matter. But doing something like All-Star gave me the musculature to say, well, I can have fun with this stuff. I can not worry about, Batman beats you down. It was my favorite. I had such a great experience, but the health of the line is measured against Batman, and it's every month for 6 years. Doing an issue that has to sell above 100,000, or it's seen as a failure. Doing something that's deeply personal, where it's relevant, where it stands on the shelves. that pressure is a lot, it's a lot. And I love it. Like, I would do it again in a second. But, that year off allowed me to breathe and be like, well, I can just have fun with these characters. How do I remember what I love about comics and events, even the most commercially fraught and sort of, sort of tethered, books possible. How do I fall back in love with that? Like, everything sort of comic book storytelling, related. How do I go back to my childhood joy of that? And that was really what that year was, So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It does. Well, and the event stories kind of is like the most pure sort of form that comic books have, I think, because, you have so many great standalone stories, whether it's Watchmen or whether it's, Dark Knight or something like Marvel's, but they all kind of draw from these bigger stories, these characters exist. And when the characters cross over, when you see the world that these characters exist in, you suddenly realize, oh yeah, Batman and Superman, yeah, they would probably need to do stuff occasionally together to fight those bigger threats. And I think there's something about the events where there's a reason they just sell so well, regardless of quality, regardless of anything. Obviously, hopefully the better one, if one's better than the other, it's going to sell better. But there is something that all comic fans, I think, just intrinsically love about events. It's just something so fun about that. It's just so comic booky, and that's not a negative. That's not a negative thing, right?
Well, it's like those. When I was a kid, I had the X-Men Mutants poster, and it was just, I loved it because it was all of the
thrown
mutants
together. Yeah.
Right, it was like everybody that you've seen a little bit of or seen a lot of, all just in one place.
And there's a reason the Avengers movies are kind of the biggest of the Marvel movies, right? Because you're getting those characters together. When customers come into this,
and it makes you feel like everything that you've bought into sort of is paying off in some way. And I think the bad rap that comes with events is that, sometimes we take for granted that it's all built on the passion of fans for these characters, and they buy all the stuff. And then it's like, okay, yeah, you do an event, and of course they'll show up, but it's time for one or that kind of stuff. And with this one, and I think with the way DC is really looking at the fans, because we were in the fucking doghouse for a while, with the with the New 52 and that stuff, it was great, and then it kind of. There were all those kind of counters that were like, how long before DC does something stupid? And there was just a lot of criticism of us giving up the legacy and all that. And Rebirth really corrected course. And I think the thing that I give Dan and Jeff and Jim and Bob tremendous credit for was they were always very aware of retailers and fans, going to those retailer shows, going to the meetings and saying, we're going to try and do better. And sometimes we didn't. And sometimes we did, but now that it's going well, they are just eager, not just to kind of keep it safe, because that would be metal too, but to say to me, do what you want to do with Justice League. Just go nuts. Just have fun. Let's use the capital in the bank to take a risk as opposed to just playing it safe. And I love what we have planned. I genuinely, because you want to get really frank. There are many times when my contract comes up where I'm like, maybe now is when I, take some time and just do indie stuff, and just take some time off from superheroes, because I never thought, every time that this happens, I'm on Batman, I get, I'm never thought it was going to happen. And doing metal, of course, I'm like, oh, maybe. The only thing that keeps me in is the creative promise of it. I swear, it's not the money, it's not the golden handcuffs or whatever. It's that when Dan says you can do whatever you want, go. You have all the toys. And you're
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I have a story. I have something I think is the best thing I've done. If you don't think you're doing the best thing you're doing, get out. All that stuff. So it's that feeling where you're all right, this is the one. This is the one where I'm going to do my best work and that stuff. But I always feel like, do I step back now or not? And the fact that DC right now, the zeitgeist of DC is so good, dude. Bendis, I mean, we get along great. We got along long before, not long, but, a couple years before he came over, we started talking personal stuff, like family stuff, and hit it off. And so I was so excited when he came over, and there's stuff you guys don't even know about that's going to be announced really soon about other big creators, other big series, all this kind of stuff that's, it's an embarrassment of riches, and just the climate at DC right now is great. And I would never show for them, like, as a kind of corporate stooge, but I mean it. Like, I've been there a long time. I've been there, 9 years almost at this point, and this is the best it's ever been, easily. We all, you see the pictures. I mean, we get along, like Tom, me, James, Josh, Sam, the Bensons, like, we all like each other. Everybody working on stuff, Bendis, all of it. So I don't know. I really predict great things this year. I think it's going to be a good year.
We've talked about you in the past on this podcast, and correct me if I'm wrong, but guys like yourself and Jeff Johns, obviously Jeff Johns, but you guys just aren't, at this point, you're not just a freelance writer sitting there wondering what your next gig's going to be. I mean, you're way more involved with DC on like a corporate level, right, at this point, right? I mean, because you're doing the teaching, the writers' workshops, and
I don't know if this is like out of school, but I have 2 contracts with DC. I have a writing contract and I have a consulting contract.
Right.
So I have sort of two different roles, and the consulting is more of it's part the teaching, and it's also the development over sort of areas of the line, like that come from, events and stuff, like what we're doing with New Justice. So we're doing No Justice, and that kind of leads to New Justice. So that sort of, looking at the line and seeing where things could be maybe brushed up and trying to help, when I'm sort of invested in that area creatively and I'm not stepping on anyone's toes. Maybe developing some stuff at Vertigo, those kinds of things. So I'm very print. Like, I don't have, I'm not TV, film, that kind of stuff. But I love.
Do they call you, though? I mean, I have to assume that they're like, hey, Scott, we're going to have the Court of Owls on Gotham. What do you think? Sure. Like,
yeah. I mean, they always tell you that stuff ahead.
Right.
And they're very nice. Like, you get to talk to the people there. And so, no, there's no, they involve you as much as they can. So there's, this was, for the last 2 years, I've had sort of a consulting gig with them, but this year it was a little bit more involved, a little bit less solely on the teaching, a little bit more kind of, just buying into steering things a bit from Justice League.
Well, and DC's moving in so many new directions with so many new lines. Obviously, the TV shows, the movies, the video games. I mean, we're not just a couple of comic books a month. I mean, this has become so much more than that. The toys,
the ink and the Zoom,
all the new lines. So I have to assume you guys are on the creative end way more involved than probably what the same position would have been 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I'm very proud of the way they're kind of diversifying the line in that regard, because I think one of the dangers, if you only have the DCU and you're trying to sort of, and we've been in that position before where I think they did at times try and put everything in the DCU, where they tried to put books that might be a little bit more YA, books that, and not that that's a bad thing to have kind of a diverse line, because I think it's great to have sort of a robust publishing plan for the DCU, but having these other avenues where you can go even deeper dive into certain territories, like that you have a YA and a middle grade line, and you have a black label, so you can do stuff that's more mature and more art based, and you have, straight up superhero stuff at the DCU, but you also have room. I mean, there are books coming out that are more sort of Hawkeye-ish, all that kind of stuff that you'll see soon, but that you have these other avenues to really sort of flex those muscles when you want, and have commercial landing pads for them as well. If they're like, some books just do better in trade, and having a system set up to be able to say, these are books for, this audience, and we have a big sort of publishing structure for them to really hit hard in trade and publicity and marketing and, library shows, all that kind of stuff. Like, DC's, I'm very, very, I think I admire the way that they're going about looking at the line as kind of how do you give everybody the thing that they're looking for from us without putting it all in one place? Like, there is, when you look at the superhero line, there is something for everybody within the superhero line, but there's also now room to go crazy in these other areas as well and give people very, very different kinds of superhero books, and books that they really want, that fulfill, very, very needed roles, I think, in the readership. So I hope that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, at no point, short of maybe the 1930s and 40s, have comic book characters been in front of so many eyes with the movies and TV shows. There's been attempts at Marvel and DC in the past to sort of diversify the line that have not quite worked, including very recently. I like DC's approach because it seems more natural. I think when you have something that works and you try to replicate it 50 times, like, that's it's a little disingenuous. They really need to make each of these books feel like they're a unique product made, not just kind of churned out in like a factory. Like, this worked, let's copy it. I hope. We've seen a huge influx of young adult and more kids-oriented titles in comics outside of Marvel and DC, and I'm really excited that both Marvel and DC are now focusing. There is more focus on that stuff, and I don't know what Marvel's long-term plan is here, but I assume if things like Ink and Zoom are successful, Disney and Marvel will become. They're already a little involved in it, but it's Disney kind of outsources that stuff. I would assume Marvel themselves would become more involved in that. So.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Disney has incredible channels for that stuff already. And there are things like, I don't know, man. I just feel like the kind of glacial machinations of all of it for everybody kind of, saying it's all superheroes and what happens in superheroes. Superhero Girls sells, it's a multi-million-dollar franchise for us. And the fact that comics move in that direction where it's not just what happens in superhero comics, it's the whole machine. It's that, you're creating lines that go to, middle grade, you're creating lines that go to teenage, you're creating lines that go to mature adult with Black Label. All of that stuff is saying the audience is expanding and diversifying in so many ways, and it says we can be diverse in our main line as well. It doesn't mean that the main line should be any less diverse, but it means you also have areas to experiment and to try and sort of go even further with certain things. Like, if you had a book that's really mature, like a Dark Knight Returns or a Killing Joke, and you have to do it in the DC line, it's not that it wouldn't be terrific or amazing or whatever it is, but it stretches the elasticity of that thing so far, and it might be an outlier and it might fail. Where if you have a support system for it that directs it towards its audience and says, I know you've been looking for that book that says this is fucking Goodfellas in Batman or whatever it says. Go for it. There you go. Like, there's the book. There's Azzarello and Bermejo. They're going to do a terrific book. Their book. And for me, like the book I want to do with Greg, we with Black Label, Batman, Last Night on Earth or Batman Nocturne, whichever we call it, like that.
That was supposed to be Sean Murphy, right? Originally,
it was.
Right. And now he's. I assume after White Knight that he's like, okay, and now more of this because this was such a hit. Yeah. White Knight, really shocked me how well it sold.
Sean. I'll give you like a Frank Thierry kind of story about Sean. Sean was one of the first people I met, in comics back when I was starting American Vampire, and we did that miniseries together on American Vampire the second year that it was around. We got along like gangbusters from go. He gave me his Wolverine book that got him in trouble with Marvel when we first started hanging out. The Wolverine ABCs. Have you seen that?
No, I don't think so.
I have it on my shelf. Yeah. He did a Wolverine ABCs where it's like the alphabet,
like a kid's book.
But it's spelled out with like Marvel characters with Wolverine always in it. So it's great. I'll show it to you. He was selling it, and then they got mad at him, and then he was like, "I'll never work at Marvel." It was like a whole. So we go way back, me and Sean. But it was around the time we were doing the Wake, and he was like, we were at Boston Comic Con, I'll never forget, and we were all sitting together, and Capullo was there, and we were laughing and joking around. He kind of taps me, and he's like, I'm just going to ask you this straight up. Are we ever going to become real friends? And I was like so offended by this comment where I was like, what are you talking about? This is like back in the Wakes. This is like 2013 or whatever. I was like, what are you even talking about, dude? I talk to you all the time. And he's like, about work and about this, but like we never get together and just hang out and have a beer like this, man. And I was so mad. I was like, you know what? I'm going to be this guy's best friend. And the irony of it was like, we just, you know, he was right. Like he was totally right. And then we wound up talking a lot about just, you know, I'd call him and we'd talk about, you know, kids and wives and life and everything. And, he's one of my best friends. So what happened with that was that I pitched him this story back in, it was really around the same time we did The Wake. I've had this story in my head because it really came from, and I know I'm like on a million digressions tonight, but it came from Grant Morrison when I was doing 0 Year, when I was planning 0 Year. It was right before I was planning 0 Year when I was finishing Death of the Family. And I was really stressed out because of all the stuff that I had told you about. And I saw Grant Morrison in San Diego, and we were just becoming friendly. I had met him a few times before and hung out with him. And he was like, what's the matter? You look so upset. I was just like, yeah, I'm just stressed out, man. Batman's a lot. And he was like, it's easy. Give him a birth and give him a death, and then he's yours. Like, it's your version. And so 0 Year was the birth that had a lot to do with the things that my kids are afraid of versus what I was afraid of that, you know, when Year One came out. And the death, the other story that I started working on around the same time was this, the one that I wanted to do at some point with somebody. And the reason that, you know, I approached Sean about it because I felt like it would be an all-star, because I was like, Greg is going to come back from taking a break, and he's going to want to do, you know, an event like metal, and then he's going to want to do indie stuff, or he's going to want to do, I don't know, anything else. And so I approached Sean. I thought Sean would be great. And then watching White Knight take off, and, you know, I read White Knight in early versions before there was art, all that stuff. And to see Sean just explode with it, I'm so proud of him. I mean, he really is like, he's one of the best guys I know. He's like, I will defend that guy till the end of time. He's a brother to me, and he's one of the best talents in the industry. But to see him do so well, I called him like a few months ago, and I was like, look, dude, do you still want it? Like the story I pitched you, which is the same story. When I realized Greg was going to be free, and Greg wanted to kind of, he had 6 issues left at DC and he would do it. I approached Sean and I was like, look, you know, friend to friend, I think this is a story that it would make more sense to do my last, like how our Batman goes down story with Greg, because, you know, he was the one that started it. And your version of Batman is so definitive to you, like it's so perfectly yours, that to ask you to draw him for me, I feel like at this point would be diluting your own brand on Batman, and they're going to want a White Knight 2, and they're going to want a White Knight 3. So,
oh yeah, of course.
What's the point? And he was like, I'm really glad you said that, because I would have done. He was, to his credit, he was like, I love this story, and I would have done it for you, and I would have been really happy, and I know we would have, you know, we would have knocked it out of the park together as a team. But I really I'm so excited to do my own stuff, and I was like, dude, friends forever, no worries, you know. We were great. This was a long time ago. We just didn't want to say anything about it until it got closer to when Greg could kind of confirm he would do it and all that stuff and everything. And, you know, so that's why. So it's a story that I've had in my head. It makes a lot more sense to do with Greg. You know, I'm really glad he'll do it with me. And, you know, Sean is just a monster. He's awesome at every level.
Well, I think we're going to have a couple questions here about metal. I know we want to ask you a few questions, and we got a ton of questions online. So I don't want to spoil anything. Kev?
No. I was saying if you're going to get a question ready, I have one loaded.
Go for it.
Scott, as an event virgin before this, besides steering the massive cruise ship of a company-wide event like this, this question is more about you as the individual writer. Could you tell us about maybe a creative challenge that you struggled with, now looking back at it, now that you've got some breathing room? Any aspect of writing this, either an individual issue or an element to the story that maybe gave you some difficulty as the writer? Yeah.
I think the hardest thing was going to the darkest place with the story that we went to in Batman Lost, and also when you see Batman in Metal 4, when he's old and he's really beaten and he says, I don't want to find out anything else. Like, I'm finished, you know, like as a detective, I don't want to know any more answers because everything just leads back to darkness. That was very hard. I mean, I struggled with that DC was like, go ahead and do whatever you want at that point, but I struggled with it personally because, you know, for me, it was funny because when I pitched the story, I said to Dan, when I told him and Greg, I was like, this story is very much about, like I said to you earlier, like the points in my life where I felt every road from here forward will only lead back to failure. So what's the point of getting out of bed? What's the point of going on? All that stuff. And, you know, it's been a long time, luckily, since I've been in a particularly bad place with that stuff. But when you're there, there's no way out. It just feels like your own mind is rebelling against you and everything, you don't have a good purchase on reality. You only have these terrible versions of yourself staring at you in the mirror constantly. So going to that place with Batman, who's sort of indomitable and completely impervious to that sort of vulnerability, was hard because I didn't know if I would be bending the character too far. That was hard. And let me think, like, what else about it? I mean, that was the hardest emotionally, honestly. It was that but that's the stuff that I feel like at the end of the day is always the most rewarding. You know, if you can show why those characters helped you through those things or made you brave in the face of these things, that, you know, having them do that again in your stories is always the thing that feels best.
Mm-hmm. You can't see us nodding around the table.
Well, I want to ask a couple super nerdy questions here.
Sure.
And
shocking.
Feel free to not answer because I don't know if you're going to follow up with these in Justice League or DC Nation.
He can be frank.
Because one of my favorite characters, how do I put this? It is such a nothing character. I mean, he's so important to DC, yet there's never no one knows anything about him. There's never any stories about him. That's the Monitor. Now, when the Monitor shows up in a story, my interest goes from 11 to 17. Like, I just go through the roof when the Monitor shows up because
you went through the roof with Daniel.
Well, okay. I love Sandman, right? But that's different. That's separate. With the Monitor, I love the Infinite Multiverse, and one of my bigger disappointments with New 52 and this has gone back and forth for a number of years now is the limiting of the multiverse. I like the idea of I think Graham Morrison even in Multiversity sort of pitched it as like a multiverse of multiverses, like it kind of kept spreading. But in this issue, again, I don't want you to spoil something, especially if you're going to talk more about it in upcoming books, but we have the Monitor, who is had been held captive. He was the person captive by the Batman who laughs for the whole series. People didn't know who it was, and especially at the very end with the breaking of the Source Wall, which I love that the breaking of the Source Wall just happens like a random little side panel. It's just like, yeah, we're just going to break the Source Wall. Sure, why not? Are we now seeing like the expansion back into the infinite multiverse? Because we have like Earth 53 and obviously all the different other different characters in that panel. Yeah. Well, the backside is like the underside, but I mean, are we now going back into that infinite multiverse status?
Well, I wouldn't call it we're not going back to any kind of status that was there before with an infinite multiverse. It's just a different map. So the idea is almost like what's beyond the Source Wall is not what you used to know. It's not the infinite multiverse.
Right.
It's sort of an invitation to writers and artists. I mean, I have Justice League completely depends on all that stuff. So with No Justice, No Justice picks up with the Source Wall broke, the entire Corps goes to repair it, and as they do, they realize that at the edge of the universe near the Source Wall, there are ancient things that wake up as a mechanism when the Source Wall breaks.
All right.
And Brainiac comes down, grabs the teams and says, I'm going to moneyball you because I need your help defending my home planet Kolu from this thing that's coming. And, it goes from there. And then at the end of No Justice, I'm spoiling everything, but at the end of No Justice, the heroes realize that because of sort of the expansion of the DCU, how wondrous and terrifying and unknown everything is beyond the wall, they need to fight in new formations, and that sort of sets up New Justice, which gives you Justice League Dark, Justice League Odyssey, and a couple other books we haven't announced yet. But Hawkman also, and some of that stuff.
Yeah, because I do love that infinite multiverse, and I understand if maybe shy away from the specific, like, on Earth 267. I get shying away from that, but I love the idea of just like, we could take the Elseworlds, we could take the all these random old stories, and obviously guys like Grant Morrison and was not afraid to have just said, sure, we'll take Batman Zur-En-Arrh, and we'll take all these Batmite and all these crazy concepts and throw them into the DC universe, and deal with them or don't, right?
Elseworld books,
what's that?
Down.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that I felt with I don't know. One of the engines behind Metal was the idea that I didn't want to recreate the infinite multiverse as it was exactly before.
Right.
But 52 universes just felt, well, where are all the others? Like, where are all the fears and worries and, hopes that we have? Like, where are all those worlds that if you actually look at like theories of if there is a multiverse, in the real world, and it is something that, matter as it sort of expands if it's infinite in some regard, like must reform the same sort of combination, so that somewhere there is a planet that has the same, it goes to the exact point that we are now, but then I fall off my chair and whatever. Or if, space-time is flat and not linear and it all exists like, in all of those kinds of things, it can't just be 52. Like, why would it just be 52 possibilities? Right. It would be everything. It wouldn't be a deck of cards. It would be all the cards always, ever. So the Dark Multiverse was a way of creating a new realm where all this kind of roiling possibility would exist, both good and bad, when Barbatos is struck down and we recreate the Forger of Worlds. That would kind of make sense of the fact that the multiverse is sort of the worlds that cook, the worlds that people collectively hope and fear might exist. And everything that's kind of a nascent or fluid emotional, possibility, that sort of stays in the dark and goes back to the Forge. So it was very much like trying to sort of recreate the infinite, like you're saying, with the DCU, without sort of returning to just the old. Well, guess what? It's not, because I feel like we've oscillated between those two poles multiple times, where it's like, it's an infinite multiverse. No, it's a 52. No, it's infinite again. No, it's just one universe. No, this kind of set up a model for me, at least, that kind of gave us gave us all at once, like everything at once, in a way that could work.
Yeah, it makes sense. I did have one more question I want to open up to these guys too. Let me one more. So obviously Sandman, Daniel was a big part, especially in the early part of the book. Did you have more plans for him? Did you want to use him more? Is this kind of like, did you get to do with him what you wanted to do? Because I don't know again if the Neil Gaiman's little line of the kind of his return to the Sandman books I'm assuming you must have known about it when you started this. I don't know how far
I did.
I did. Yeah.
But I learned about it when I pitched using Sandman. So it kind of went back. I pitched it first, and then it came back to me that they were going to do this. And so it would be a perfect sort of combination of things. So if I had 20 more pages and I wanted to murder Greg Capullo, like in issue 6, I would have done a scene where Batman alone goes to some place in Wayne Manor and Daniel appears and they talk.
Yeah.
But I was telling Greg, like at that dinner that I was telling you about, where he was like, next time we do it differently. We had this like really personal talk where I was just like, dude, it's just a calculation with each moment. And in this moment, it mattered more to me to give you the scene at the end with everybody celebrating and saying, here are all the hooks coming after, than it did a scene alone with Daniel. If I had, there's no criticism that someone is going to level at the book. And this goes true of Tom, of me, of like, of all of us. Like, if you think we don't see the flaws in our own stuff, or the things that if we had more room or we had infinite,
Tom tweets about that all the time. We're going to fix it in digital and trade.
Yeah, it's like all we do is beat up ourselves for that, like that stuff. But you make those decisions based on what you think you can do with the absolute, box restrictive, limited capacity that you get in superhero comics. So if they say you have 32 pages and that's it, and then a code, and that's it with Capullo to finish this, and otherwise, we won't do it. It won't come out on time. Yeah, you knew that from the beginning. You're always making those decisions. You're always like, and that's what I love about Grant, is that Grant will be like, and Jeff too. I mean, they'll just be like, fuck it. This happened off panel.
Yeah.
Just deal with it. Your imagination can roll with it. And, sometimes it's not always the smoothest, but you give the things that are the most important, almost constellation of things, so that you can connect it and make the picture and the stars that you want as a reader. If you had all of the room in the world, which is like a Black Label book, great. But if you're under pressure and the company is depending on it for their bottom line, all of it, you can't be like, you know what, I'd like to take 10 more pages. You just can't.
Yeah. Well,
there was a period, I'll tell you this, when we were doing Zero Year, where Batman was doing so well that they just allowed that stuff. They were like, to me, you want a couple extra pages, take a couple extra pages. So if you go back and you look at those issues, a lot of them stretch beyond 22 pages.
Yeah, there were some bigger ones.
Yeah, and what happened was, and that's my favorite kind of arc that we did, during our Batman run, but when I go back and I look, what I didn't understand was those extra pages were murdering the art team. Because I was like, oh, it's not a big deal, it's just a page or two. But even a page or two just killed them. Yeah. And so, anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that all of it is the stuff you keep in mind as you grow and you get to something like this, like Metal. You kill your darlings to get the better darlings, for everybody else.
They're all in Lucien's library, right? I mean, all those untold stories. So,
yeah, and the Neil Gaiman stuff, the Sandman universe is going to be really good, and the hooks what Dan Abnett's doing with the Atlantis Risen and the Dark Pantheon of New Gods that's coming in Wonder Woman and the Dark Stars and Rob Venditti stuff and then the Sourceful stuff is all Justice League No Justice and all of that. So, we're trying to pick them up right away and just make it something that feels like, it had effect, but not just like a swerve. It was like, this is what it built towards. The whole event was about going past the boundaries that you feel comfortable with. And then when you do and you fail, picking yourself back up with the help of others and going past that. That's why we broke the source wall. It was sort of like, how do we articulate those things in the most, emotional way possible? Well, then let's go beyond where the DCU has ever gone.
So was Final Crisis and Return of Bruce Wayne, all those Grant Morrison books. Was any part of Metal initially kind of like we want to continue some of that story arc with was it Barbados or I would say Barbados? The bat always comes out.
I would just say Barbados, but my wife says Barbados.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's what I say, Barbados.
Yeah. Was kind of that an initial pitch in there to be like, yeah, let's sort of go back to that story arc and grab those characters, or did it sort of naturally progress out of that as you went?
It was different. I mean, the story with Barbados, it began again. I started. I mean, I love Dark Knight, Dark City, and I had started seeding in those ideas really early in our run, where I was like, I'd like to do something with this idea, and then Grant used it in Return of Bruce Wayne, and I was like, God damn it, he always beats me. He does it better than I could do it, so it's fine. But the idea was really sort of, as I got closer to doing it, I realized, I wanted to use Final Crisis and other events that I had loved, like even stuff like Darkseid War, use them as touchstones and say, this is what events are about. Obviously using the antenna from Infinite Crisis, elements of, the original Monitor, the Anti-Monitor's brain, all that kind of stuff from, Crisis on Infinite Earths, all trying to bring in everything I could from different DC moments and saying, here are the things this is built on the shoulders of. That was important to me. So yeah, if that makes any sense,
Yeah, no, makes perfect sense. You got a question there, Brock?
Well, I mean, for me, I think that especially the end of Dark Knight's Metal, where you tease a lot of stuff, and it's stuff that Joshua Williamson is doing, stuff that Abnett is doing over with Aquaman. Yeah.
Dark Stars, baby. Yeah, super excited for the return of the Dark Stars. I love those guys.
Did this come about because you have such a kind of open communication and stuff with everyone else at DC
I hope so. I mean, I can tell you, if you go back and you look at like my Instagram, it's pretty easy to figure out when you go back and you like look at the paper trail. But I was out there in July, I think, of last year when Metal was just about to start, and then I was out there again in November. In July, I sort of pitched the basic ending of Metal, and then before it started, and then in November, I pitched the ending really hard, and I was like, "This is what I really want to do." I mentioned this before, but they wear this armor, they're monkey paws. What do you want to do in your series? And DC sort of, called in. Some of the people were out there, some of the people they called in too, but you can see, that was what that summit was by November, we were like, what are the repercussions of Metal? So my goal was to say to everybody, look, if your character wore armor, that would essentially give them the power to sort of, again, even if they don't know they're doing it, have their kind of sublimated desires become material in the present and forward-moving DCU. What would those be? So we approached everybody, it was before Brian came over. So at the time it was, Pete on Superman. It was, Tom on Batman, and just everybody. And I said, do you want to do something that you couldn't do without this lever to pull? And some people like Tom, he knew he had the wedding stuff coming. So he was like, there's no lever I want to pull because I'm doing this, but maybe right afterwards, I'll have a delayed sort of effect of that. I was like, go for it if you want, no worries. And then other people like Dan Abnett, Rob Venditti were like, I've been building towards stuff, but you know what? I'd rather use this to sort of make it happen faster than wait and just build another 10 issues, to get there. So it was really, really collaborative in that regard. So it was, all those ideas were ideas that came from the people on the books. None of it was like me saying, well, I need this to happen or I need this to happen. It was all sort of me going to them saying, you now have like a totally malleable, like a totally malleable sort of way of, making your story crazy in any regard. Like, what is the deepest desire your character has that they would never admit? Do you want that to materialize in the book? So Josh took it up first, Williamson, and one of the funny things was like he started building Flash War out of it. And then I realized, I was like, well, in the story, I don't know that we need Flash to be exactly there and wear the armor. And he was like, great, well, then I can build it myself and you can still do it. And so it was great because it was just, I tried to just give everyone the silly putty and just say, do what you want. And what came back was...
Well, the thing is, like, it felt natural coming out of Metal, like you're getting these glimpses of what's to come. And it felt like it was a natural kind of thing. Where in some events that I've read in the past, it's like kind of a forced down your throat.
I wanted it to be like an accelerant, where I would just say, or a catalyst, where it was like, what are you building towards? If you want like the shortcut or the magic portal there, use this, so that it still feels organic to your series and it builds on whatever it is that you're working towards. But it gives you a fast pass.
Well, Ryan knows that one.
Ryan wants to go to Disneyland now.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Yeah,
I think to compliment Scott, I don't think he's gotten a compliment in a few minutes, so I'm going to give him one. Going back to, I think the first event I can think of saving money and spending money on would be the very first Marvel Contest of Champions. Then there was Crisis on Infinite Earths, Secret Wars, and I think a lot of what happens with these events is that the publishers, aside from the intent of the creators, the publishers kind of trumpet, nothing will ever be the same after this. And you invest in 12 issues and 12 crossovers, and at the end of the first Secret Wars, Spider-Man has a black costume.
Yeah.
And some of the Crisis crossovers, there's a panel where a character says, oh, look, the sky's red. Anyway, back to the story.
Yeah, exactly.
I think with Metal, what you really delivered on is, A, everything is different at the end, and B, all of the crossover issues, if we want to call them, I don't know if crossover is the right word, the standalone, the tie-ins, were satisfying on their own, were a satisfying reading experience from top to bottom. And so it's really a tribute to you as kind of the architect of this whole thing and all of the people working in unison with you. I couldn't tell you the last crossover, the last big event where I've bought every issue that's tied into it. This is the first one. I mean, it might be double-digit years since I've done that.
And just so Scott knows, Kevin was wary at the beginning of this.
Yeah, because Kevin has been burned.
I know. But you and I had discussions about this. I said, you need to buy it. And you're like, I don't know, I've been burned. I'm like, no, you need to buy this. And you're like, fine, hard sell, man, fine. And then it was just like downhill from there.
Well, and the first 2 issues right away, the Forge and the casting, what I was hooked right away is that they didn't feel like other events. I really appreciated the weaving in of Challengers of the Unknown and Hawkman and kind of the magical element, which really kind of set it off on a different vibe than a standard crossover, which we don't need to name them all, but I was hooked from the beginning, and I just wanted to compliment you and all of your team for really delivering top to bottom on a project that felt big, but never felt unwieldy and felt coherent and paid off in the end.
I really appreciate you saying that. I mean, and what I would do is throw credit to the creators involved, honestly, because, my job was to go to them and say, here are the pieces, do what you want with them. And I would say, again, like to the whoever's listening that eventually gets to plan an event, the wonderful thing about it is when you give people the room and ownership over it. So I didn't put my name on all of the crossovers and all that stuff. Not that people do, but I just mean, I wanted them to feel like they were doing their story, given the pieces. They take off and they do things that you couldn't do. So there was a lot of fun to being able to go in there and say, you have a really important piece, but do with it what you want. So that format worked out really well. I'm really proud of it in that regard, and again, when Greg's like, next time we'll, and I was like, put down your glass for a second. Let's talk about this. It was one of those things where it's a calculation very much about kind of where people are with comics and how they feel about events and going out there and saying, we're going to do something that's ours, but just everyone that's involved, let them own their piece. Let them go crazy and just say, do your Frazetta meets Kirby, thing that's yours. That, I don't know. It was such a good experience. I mean, I was nervous, like staying around afterwards with DC. I was sort of like, I just go out on this one just because it was such a fun ride. But I'm on Justice League, so that's it. Right?
We'll get to Justice League in a second because I do want to talk to you a little bit about Justice League and Action Comics 1000. But we got a ton of questions here from people online. Sure. But let me you've actually answered a lot of them throughout the course of this episode. So pardon me if I don't read everyone's questions because I don't think you want to be here for like 4 or 5 more hours. But there was a couple here I definitely want to get to. Bennett asks, will we see the remaining Dark Knights soon in any upcoming story arcs? Metal number 6 didn't make their fates conclusive, and I know at least the Batman Who Laughs will show up in as part of Immortal Men, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. That's right, and he'll be part of. Yeah, we have a big plan for Batman Who Laughs around Halloween next year. So
cool.
Yeah, that's nice. Super spoilery. But yes, he will be back, and a couple of the other Dark Knights too, and even some ones that you didn't get to meet, maybe.
But there's a whole infinite a somewhat infinite multiverse of them out there, right? So,
you should have seen the board, man. When we had like the Nightmare Batman, there was one that was sort of the Punisher Batman. There was one that was like the Sorcerer, like the evil magic Batman. There were a lot that I was really close to using, and it was just nice. There's not room for him in this story. So there were many that got left on the cutting room floor that would have been really cool.
Well, I think that The Man Who Laughs really just took off with this. I mean, because I remember after reading, the opening and stuff like that, people were already like tweeting at you custom photos of their custom toys they'd already done. The cosplay was like the immediate, next day.
Yeah. That's how you know you've done something all right. Yeah.
I'll tell you the truth. Like when I did Court of Owls, we were like 3 issues in. I think I was at C2E2 or whatever, and they were talking about making it an event or not because they were like, people seem to like this, but we're not sure. And at the event, someone came up dressed as a Talon in a homemade costume.
Nice.
That was beautiful. And Bob Harris grabbed my arm. He was editor-in-chief at the time, too. He still is. And he grabbed my arm and he goes, "You just got your event." And I was like, and he means it. Like, when fans do that stuff and they respond, DC sees it. I mean, Marvel, too, I'm sure. But they read the enthusiasm. As much as it seems like, they're remote and whatever, they're not. Like, they're there on the con floor. They look at the aggregate reviews. They're very aware of fan response, So they pay a lot of attention to that stuff. And so Batman Who Laughs, I mean, to me, it was really about, can I create something that's scarier than the Joker at this point in my life? Like, Joker to me is a character that has something to prove. He wants to prove to you that all the worst things that you think about yourself, all the worst fears that you have, that all those are true, and that you thinking that they're not is like a joke. And he wants to prove it to you and like laugh at you while you kind of burn in your own, folly about that. The Batman Who Laughs already knows all of that. Doesn't give a shit if you see it or not. Like, all he wants to do is sort of survive. And if you get in his way, he will kill you. He is like the apex predator of everything. He's sort of like, he plans, he's got nothing to show you. He's got no personal vendetta, but you come near him and he's got 800 ways to kill you. You know what I mean? That's who he is to me. So that's why he's very interesting to play off the Joker. So there are plans for that in the future, as well as in my stuff and everything, without giving too much away.
Cool. I mean, I think awesome. Just what you said earlier, I mean, I think we're going to see a Batman Punisher style thing now, and a Batman magical one.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
I would do it. I mean, it's just, you try and write in your fears and your hopes, and it's the difference between being, a dad. Like, Death of the Family is a fear of fatherhood, It's very much about, what if I'm a terrible father again, my second kid? I wrote that while we were pregnant with Emmett. He's 6 years old, going to be 7 next year, I'm 40 plus now. I mean, now I'm at a different point where a younger man, you're sort of like, does everyone feel the way I feel? Like, it goes so fast, and what if all my fears are true? And that's Joker saying, yes, they are. The Batman Who Laughs is like, now you're past it. All those fears are possible. That they could really happen. Get out of my, you know what I mean? Like, and he's sort of like, he's almost an older, meaner, like, crueler Joker. Like, Joker still is young. He has like something to prove. And they're the same age. It's not like, I don't mean physically old, but he's a scarier character in that he's got nothing. It's the difference between sort of that serial killer that sort of has nothing but the sort of hunger that they have to kind of come after you, and the person that's like, alone in their house. It's like, just don't come near me, because I don't know. I don't want to get too real world with it. I see them as almost like very, very different animals, and both very scary. And when you put them together, they're really interesting. I like playing them off each other. So there's a lot of Joker being like, well, you're not the real thing, and Batman Who Laughs being like, I can help you. Like, I plan. You don't. You're like my son. Like, go, let's do it. So there's a lot of stuff coming. It's like that.
For this next question, I don't want this possibly could tie in with your upcoming Batman Black Label stuff, so I don't want to feel free to skip on this question if you want. But Steven says, during your Batman run, was there any unused story arcs or villains you didn't have a chance to use that you wanted to use? As we were talking earlier, I'm sure there's many stories that you're like, oh, got to cut that. Oh, got to cut this character out. Oh, got to completely course correct. But, was there any that you really wanted to use that sort of got away from you?
Scarecrow is really the only one that I didn't get to use as a villain out of like the major kind of gallery of, Batman bad guys. So I had an idea for him that I didn't get to do, but it's not part of the book I'm doing with Greg, really. He's in it. The book I'm doing with Greg is really, it opens with Batman young, but it's sort of in the future. And
I'll play the Dan Didio role here and tell you not to spoil too much stuff, okay?
Okay, I won't.
You should have heard Scott on stage at WonderCon spoiling like crazy.
I did. Okay. I watched the video,
okay.
Well, no, I won't spoil too much. But it's definitely, it's sort of like an Old Man Logan meets DKR. Meets year one. I mean, because it cuts back and forth between early Batman years and the last things of his life, and he's trying to get home. He doesn't understand why he is where he is, and Wonder Woman's in it, Superman, Darkseid, everybody's in it. So it's a big, sort of a giant DCU story. But Greg and I have never gotten the chance to kind of work, without a time limit, even though we're both kind of workaholics about it. So there's no chance it's going to be like, well, this is going to take like 6 months, the first issue. at all. Believe me, like there'll be a page a day kind of stuff from both of us that way. But the fact that we can say, do you want to do this as digital painting? Do you want to do this as black and white? Do you want to do this as based on the story? I mean, we've never had that luxury. So what we're going for here is just something you haven't seen from us at all.
Cool.
Pre-order. We need to be able to pre-order early.
Oh, yeah. Trust me, it'll be there. Tyler wants to know, who's the better detective, Batman or Detective Chimp?
Oh.
The hard-hitting questions.
Batman, they're very different. I mean, Detective Chimp for me is like, I fell in love with that character so bad, and I almost I tried to pitch Sean. I was like, well, if I do this thing with Greg, will you do a Detective Chimp story with me, please? Yeah. And he was like, we'll see. So if you guys convince him, maybe we'll do it. But I mean, Detective Chimp, I love the character because it's one of those things that just kind of spoke to me and makes no sense. But, he's this ape that essentially gets beat for not learning the circus tricks that he's supposed to know. And then he finds the fountain of youth and becomes crazy smart and immortal. And he realizes that there's still always going to be mysteries beyond his grasp. And so he kind of follows these empirical detective cases that he can solve just for comfort. And that to me is like the human condition, in that way, where I'd love to do a Detective Chimp story that's like 40 pages where it gives you his history, like kind of like a Dave McKean style, Arkham Asylum style kind of story where it's Detective Chimp coming back to Florida, to the ruined remains of like the circus where he, became who he is to solve the murder mystery to solve the murder of the guy who first let him out of his cage. That's it. So
that sounds amazing. It would just need to have on the cover the black and white go-go checks from the Silver Age DC, and then like some really dark Dave McKean art underneath those. Perfect.
So that's my goal. That's a dream project. But no, I love Detective Chimp. Batman will always win, though. So Batman.
Hunter asks, or it's actually kind of a comment. Oh, and he's got a question too. He says, I've read interviews for Scott Snyder saying he battles depression and anxiety, and I'm so glad to hear someone open about it, as it helps inspire me when I've had my problems with it. So thank you for all you've done. So that was Hunter's comment. But his question is, he's wondering, you talked about how this affected your writing for Metal. He asked specifically anything for Justice League. I mean,
yeah, very much. I mean, Justice League. How can I say it without spoiling too much?
Yeah.
I'm you guys, it's weird because I feel like if you read my stuff, I mean, I've been in comics almost 10 years. You can kind of track my anxieties through my work where it's like, being a father, you can see it in Witches and in, in Zero Year and in Death of the Family. And then getting older, the mortality aspect, you see it in Endgame and that stuff. Like you can see my midlife crisis developing as I go. But what Justice League is very much about, for me at least, getting to a certain age and realizing that not only do the people that you thought, the people that you thought had everything figured out, they didn't know as much as you thought they knew. They just had a faith in the things that they believed in. And that you getting to a certain age, you realize I'm never going to know the things I thought I would as a father, as a grandfather. I'm going to have like an infinitesimal fraction of the knowledge that I had hoped to. And you're suddenly faced with a very big sense of, humility, I think, with that, and awe and terror. And so Justice League is about the source wall having broken. And the first thing that kind of comes from the other side, coming here and containing all of the energy of the source wall. And I don't want to give too much away, but as it's coming here, people like the Justice League and the Legion of Doom have very different opinions of what it might be and how to capture it and use the power that's contained within it to sort of, reshape things. And I even drew these different symbols for like Justice and Doom that'll be a big part of the series. But to me, one way to react to that idea of like this, if the source wall breaks and this thing comes from the other side, that is this humongous cosmic mystery, right? It's almost like, is that thing the thing that made us? Is it just another alien? What is it? But when you
if
suddenly
it's a blue
see
hand, I'm going to be disappointed.
They love the blue hands. I love that thing.
Thanks. Well, when you get to a point where you see stuff that makes you feel so tiny, like getting to a certain age, becoming, midlife, all that stuff, you feel small and you say to yourself, do I embrace that and say, well, that's the beauty of it. You're not going to know all the things you wanted to know. So the things that you aren't going to understand are this wondrous mystery, the same way a cat can't learn math, or you're going to kind of flip it and say, no, there is so little time and I understand so little. I need my life to be as big as possible. And that's the Legion of Doom. Justice to me, justice itself, as corny as it sounds, like the concept of it, is imposing a system of right and wrong on a natural world that gives two shits about that. So you can say, well, if you're bad, we punish you. If you're good, we reward you. That's a way of trying to make the natural world better than what it is. So justice to me is saying our nature might be flawed. Our nature might be something that, isn't what we want it to be. We'll never learn what we want to learn, but you reach to be better about, than sort of your DNA and what you're designed to be. And that's why the symbol for justice is lines. It almost looks like the Hall of Justice. It's like lines running down with a semicircle that it, crosses. The symbol for doom is the opposite. The symbol for doom is almost like a semicircle. It looks like the Legion of Doom, a semicircle, a triangle beneath that, and then lines that are completely contained by the triangle. And that says, no, you embrace your nature. We're supposed to be predatory. We're supposed to be small. We're supposed to say life is short, get yours. And that's the Legion of Doom. So it's very much about, at its core, it's crazy. You'll open it, we blow up the moon and issue, and there's all kinds of crazy shit that happens. It's like metal. It very much carries forward that spirit. But it's more magisterial, I think, and a little bit more grand, a little less like balls to the wall. We only have 6 issues. It's much more, it has more space, but it definitely is as bombastic, if not more, honestly, and ambitious. But at the end of the day, if you're asking me, is it about the same things that, keep me up at night or make me depressed or anxious? It's about that. It's about saying, do you embrace, when you realize that, when you see how small you are and how little you'll know and how little you'll achieve, do you embrace it and say, I'm part of a tradition of, a human tradition that's beyond my comprehension, and there's something wondrous to kind of giving yourself up to that and saying, I'll never understand, but that means that anything I comprehend, whether it's a heaven that looks like this or a death that is completely nihilistic where it's, nothing, I can understand those things. It must be something else. You give yourself over to the mystery and wonder of it. Or is it something where you say, fuck that. Like, I have this many years. Give me everything now. How do I make myself live forever, be a god, be as big as possible? And that is justice and doom. Wow. And even the campaign for it that they're going to do is sort of, are you justice or are you doom? Which one are you?
Well,
there's just reasons to be both. So I'm sorry that was the most, I feel like that was the most self-indulgent answer possible, but.
No, well, it's, we're obviously going to celebrate 1,000 issues of Action Comics. Superman's been around for 80 years. That's longer than most people on Earth have been around, right? Any stamp that you guys put on these characters, I'm sure in 80, 90 years, 100 years, why not? Why wouldn't the character still be around in some capacity? So, taking your own personal life and putting it through these characters, you're going to touch people that this is kind of their.
Well, it gives the material so much more depth.
Yeah, it's not just
Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and all these DC characters. There's
personality to it.
Well, it allows you to go crazy. That's what metal. I learned on metal too, is that if you have a personal compass, the story is about something that's deeply unsettling to you or inspiring to you, then you can let yourself go and have fun with it in the aspects that allow for that sort of, ridiculousness. So here, I could tell you, I just told you what Justice League's about, right? That's the core of it, and that spans the length of it. I won't tell you who kind of the Legion of Doom comprises because I want it to be a surprise, but those adversaries and the Justice League, they're really battling over this kind of what it means to be human from go. But what actually happens in issue 1 is that like crazy superpowered cavemen attack on page 2, and Martian Manhunter turns into a space dragon on 3, and like that's what it reads like. So it's not when you know what it's about and it's personal, it allows you to sort of translate that into the lexicon of like comic book crazy in a way that's so much fun. So I don't know, Metal was that sort of experiment in that for me, where I realized, okay, so I know I'm anchored with like a message and what it's about for me. Can I make it so crazy that it almost is over the top, like beyond? And this is less that. It's not so nuts that it's like editorial notes that are, wingdings and cursing. And it's much more, it's more subdued, but it's as ambitious and it's as, I hope, as surprising in that regard. So, I don't know, I hope you guys like it. I'm really, really proud of it. And Jimmy Chung is just murdering it, as is Jorge, is like out of control. Those two guys are like, they're crazy good.
Is the plan, at least now, I'll put on my retailer hat for a second, to continue the double shipping on Justice League? Because as a retailer, I love the double shipping.
Yeah, it is.
Cool.
So
sell a lot more comics.
Yeah, well, so the plan is
double ship.
I do. I love it.
As a creator, I could imagine it'd be
he does now.
a challenge.
Yeah, well, I avoided it on Batman, but Justice League, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So I'm ahead. I've written 7 issues already of it, so I'm in good shape.
Cool.
So we're going to do it. And also there's Legion of Doom is intertwined with it. So it goes like 1, 2, 3 Legion of Doom, which is issue 4. It'll be like crossed out and say Legion of Doom 1. So it'll be like 1, 2, 3 Legion of Doom 4.
Nice.
That'll be 4. So it'll be 5, 6, 7, 8 Legion of Doom, which is 9, 10. And they're
so it's kind of like the Rucka with the
Wonder Woman,
the
with
Wonder
the
Woman
two different stories.
Yeah, a little bit less.
Yeah.
Like, it'll be like 1 out of 4. Will be 1 out of 4 or 5 will be Legion of Doom, but Legion of Doom also tells the story of the villain side of what you're seeing in the book. So it's very like double helix. Like, it's not sort of like standalone. Not standalone outside of the series. It's very much like a different angle on everything you're seeing.
Yeah. I got one more question, and then I want to talk to you just for a second about Action 1000 before we let you go. Cisco says, can you confirm who the Man Who Laughs Robins are? He said, I'm probably just forgetting an answer that's plain as simple as in the book, but he said pretty sure he's the Robins that we all knew, but he said I thought they killed them off in the one shot. Did the toxin reanimate them? Yeah, I feel like they kind of dance around that a little bit, unless I'm misremembering.
No. You're right. Like, they did dance around it.
Okay. Again,
some people thought
don't spoil anything you don't want to, but
no, I won't spoil it. I'll say that I'll let them be whatever you want them to be. I think as a reader, I would say what I would. So whatever you want them. Yeah, whoever you think they are, they are.
There could be more coming.
Well, there definitely could be more.
Yeah.
But they're also, for my money, they weren't. The Batman Who Laughs traveled to many, many worlds.
Right.
So they weren't specific to his. So there was a way of getting a Dick, a Jason, a Tim, and a Stephanie, and a Damian, and all of them were his Robins just out of spite. And he would pick the versions that he could make the cruelest inversions of themselves. There's no conscience there. He is the worst.
Well,
for me, every Robin you see does have a corollary in somebody that is a Robin now. They're not randoms. They're not like random kids. They were Dick, Tim, Jason, Steph, Damian.
But not necessarily from his planet.
No, it's not from his world.
Yeah,
he might even go to a world where it would be meaner to do it and do it there, where they had a nice life.
Yeah.
So he's like the ultimate evil to me. He's just sort of, how do I make the thing that will be the worst bloodhound that I can have on a chain to hurt Bruce Wayne? That's it. Like,
when I was kind of pitching it to people, I'd say he's Batman who's half Batman, half Joker, and he's like half Michonne from Walking Dead with like this like a bunch of zombies on a chain, just like he's my little attack force with me here. There's all these like undead Robins that he just sicks at people. So I was like, I don't know how much worse you can get than this. So
yeah, well, it's almost like to me if he was going up against Bruce in a certain version or a certain moment of Bruce that would make sense to bring Robins that were all young Bruce Waynes, he would do that.
Yeah.
So they could all be Bruce Wayne as well.
He's just farming them.
Yeah. There's this
planet
of dead Robins.
Universe that's just Robins that he plucks them from.
Well, the scariest thing is to me, he's like if Joker is sort of he sees you and he comes after you emotionally. This guy is like the ultimate strategist. He's Batman. All of Batman's planning. There's no one better at sort of getting ready for the fight with you and just knowing every angle to hurt you should you come at him, but giving zero shits about you at all.
Yeah.
And there's nothing he won't do. There's no emotion in it. So for Joker, there is an affection for Batman, or there's a kind of I have something to prove to you all the time. The Batman who wants has nothing to prove. He's like the ultimate nihilist. He just does not. He's just apex predator. Does not care about whether you get it or you don't. Before you die, he gives no shits. Do you know what I mean? Like he's not like. And the punchline is he's just like bam.
Well, I want to switch 180 degrees here from the darkest of the dark to the brightest of the bright. No insult here at all at Dark Knight's Metal, because Metal was one of our highest selling books of the entire time we've been at the store. Before Watchmen before Watchmen, Doomsday Clock #1 beat that, and after Watchmen, and now Action Comics #1000 has beat that to a pulp. I have never had as many pre-orders, interest, sign-ups. I mean, I ordered, I think, double what I thought I was going to order, and then doubled it again, and then I thought I can't possibly order more, and ordered more, and then I just put another 25% order in as a reorder, because I'm like, we're not going to have enough. We're gonna sell out. We're talking. I mean, I'm terrified of my diamond bill next week. I'm gonna see it tomorrow morning, and I'm gonna be like, I don't think I can afford this. But we have people that want them all. I've never seen a comic we're talking 90s numbers. We're talking like X-Men #1 numbers.
That's great.
Dan Didio announced they had orders of 500,000 copies, and I said that's too low. Every store is going to sell out day one. It's ridiculous how much interest we've had in this book.
I'm just scared of how much I'm going to have to pack.
Yeah, Brock's shipping a ton of them. So,
I feel bad for your back.
Yeah, I feel bad for the post office.
Your back is the one that's bad. Yeah, mine is just like, God, there's so many boxes.
We're going to load a dump truck up to the post office and be like, "Yep, here you go."
Why do you think I bought a truck?
Other than just I'm sure it's great to sell a comic, be part of something like this. How does it feel to not only have Metal, but then you come off that, you have Justice League launching, but in the middle, you're part of Action Comics 1000. I mean, this is the first time, this is the only time this is going to happen. This is big on a level that I think people aren't going to quite appreciate till after it's passed.
No, I totally agree. I mean, and as it should be, it's really great to see Action 1000 do as well as it did. If Metal came near it, it would be a shame. I mean, it should be a comic that, it sort of sets a new standard. And so, no, it's a huge honor to be a part of it. And, they were like, are you okay with having 5 pages or whatever? I was like, anything. I'd have 1 page. I would do everything I could to just be a part of it for the thrill of it. And I said, I was like, all of us would have done it for free just to be a part of something that monumental. So, and then reading the stories, I haven't read all of them yet, but I read Dan Jurgens ahead of time, and I read Tom's, and they're such great tributes to Superman. It's such different angles on them as well. I really love it as a book itself too. It's just sort of all different takes on a character, and yet all of them speaking to some of the sort of similar core truths about him.
I haven't really done this in the past, but I may do it with Action 1000. I know Kevin here. You have did you show Scott that the history of the DC Universe book?
Yeah, Scott signed it as he was passing by me, mobbed by a group of fans in a hallway. So I introduced it to him in about 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. I might take Action 1000 and have one of those, like maybe the sketch cover or something, be the book where I may actually try to hunt down all the creators on it as much as I possibly can. Because I feel like this really, we'll get it next year with Detective 1000, and then I don't know. I mean, nothing else is going to come close anytime soon. So I'm really Batman? Excited for these books.
What was Batman at?
Oh, Batman! I mean, Batman won't be. I mean, if they renumber it back.
Batman. What is it? 8? I honestly, you know what? I have no clue. I'm not even going to try and guess what Batman is.
Yeah.
It must be nearing 800 or something, right? Or close?
I think so. No, maybe closer to 900.
900?
No, because Tony Daniel it was 700.
Yeah.
Right before
the relaunch.
Rebirth and stuff.
So it's probably
because Grant was 666.
Yeah. So it's probably eight somethings.
Yeah, so with the 52 and then now almost 50 from Tom. We're sitting at about 8, so.
Yeah, it'll be a while.
It'll be a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they'll celebrate Batman 100 and all that stuff too.
Yeah. And 50 is going to be a huge book with the wedding. I think that's going to be. Yeah. I think people are going to come out of the woodworks for that. So.
I mean, I'm just thinking about like everything we have coming in between the wedding and then Bendis' start and then Justice League #1 and No Justice. I mean, and then there's stuff coming. I wish I could spoil it for you, but very soon we're going to announce some big stuff coming, in some of the other big franchises at DC.
Yeah.
That, I'm like it's at the tip of my tongue, but I won't. But it really is one of those things where I'm very, very honored to be a part of DC right now. I feel like it's a golden era. So,
cool.
Wow. I think we'll do great stuff for you. I hope we do. I mean,
Yeah, I think we talked about this briefly when we had you on before. I mean, New 52 was kind of this incredible surge of energy in the store, and even though sales suffered kind of at the back, we still had books like Justice League and Batman and a few books that were outperforming anything that we'd really seen before. We kind of saw that bump up to a whole new level with Rebirth and Maintain. Which, by this point at New 52, we started to see some of the drop-off. The fact that we have things like Doomsday Clock and Metal and Justice League coming in at this point where we're 2 years out, two and change, and it's just building, that ceiling just keeps being broken. And as a retailer, I kind of wonder, like, this is the book where people just don't come in anymore, and I'm going to go out of business in 2 weeks.
Don't tell him that.
Where is it? When does this happen? Well, that's I'm sure that's a fear that DC has too, right? I mean, when does this ever stop? Because
it's like what's the point where it won't stand up anymore?
Yeah,
like,
you think you're doing great work, but you're in a vacuum. You have to wait to see what the audience says. So I just, but we keep. It keeps not happening. It keeps selling better and better.
But I mean that. Look, I don't. I can't speak to the obviously like past what I know, but what I can tell you is like one of the things that DC has been very good about the last year or 2 years, really. I mean, since I've been planning Metal, was Dan in particular made a very, very big effort to say let's plan ahead,
right.
And just get ahead of the curve. And commit to the stuff we think is going to be really good because we're bifurcating the line or, diversifying the line into all these different kind of tributaries with Zoom and Ink and everything. So if we're making the superhero line something that's a little bit more consolidated, let's know what we're doing, like know the stories. And so for me on Justice League, the outline I gave them, even though it's double ship, is for about 32 issues. So it's, a year and a half really planned out. It leads to something that's almost an event at the end of that. It has points along the way that I said, this is where we can blow it out and do an Aquaman story. This is where we can do a Dr. Fate, Swamp Thing kind of story if we want to tie into Justice League Dark. They're different moments along the way that have those kind of branch outs. And they've been great about doing that with everything. So like Tom, I know what's coming in Batman, not just like the wedding and stuff, but for, 40 issues plus. Like if you, so I mean, I know his next 20 issues at least. Like, and similar like Flash War with Josh and with James.
I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, no, Flash War is going to be great. I've been reading it. You know, Josh we trade scripts all the time, and I can tell you it's going to be something really special. So I don't know. It's just, I genuinely feel, and I mean, I worry because I'm like the same thing as you. Like, it's got to burst, right? Like, the bubble has to pop. So, you know, we've been on the bottom. We're up here now, and it feels good. But the goal is to just, with Justice League, I mean, I can tell you I'm very proud of Justice League, that and the stuff that we're doing around it. The books that I've seen my friends create, you know, in tandem with it, and the books I've read, like Hawkman, and there's really good stuff coming. Honestly, people really want to pay back the customers for giving us this moment. We've all been on the other side of it at DC, all of us, like, as creators, and so we want to not just kind of win you back, but say thank you for all the support the last year or two.
Yeah, well, you know, as long as the quality stays high and there's plans, and, you know, the problems comics run into is when you're on your 6th fill-in team in 12 issues and things get delayed, and then, you know, things just, you know, that's what makes people drop books. There's, you know, there's a reason stuff like your Batman run and Metal stayed so high for so long, is because you had such incredible consistency on that. And when there was a fill-in artist, it was a single standalone story that made sense. You know, that level of planning shows a commitment by the creative team and by editorial that the readers maybe not all consciously understand, but I think a lot of them do. They actually understand what's going on here. But even, you know, people will complain like, you know, whatever. They don't care about the artists. They're, you know, again, they just switch them around and around. I'm like, no, I mean, I think if you look at DC, you know, especially with the double shipping books, and guys doing 12 issues a year is a rarity now. Guys doing 18 or 22 issues a year is impossible. It just doesn't happen for an art team. So, you know, I mean, I feel like DC's made a real conscious effort to say, we're going to have alternating arcs with alternating artists, and they're going to have a similar style to fit the tone of the book. And, you know, you know, there are no more Jack Kirbys, and there's only one Mark Bagley. These guys just don't exist, right? I mean, you just can't get people to do 12 issues a year. It's so rare these days.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, I don't know, with the double ship, I think a lot of it was figuring out how to keep that consistency. So for me, with Justice League, it really is like, it's Jim Cheung, it's Jorge, you know, the issues for them. Jim Cheung does kind of the big interstitial issues that kind of launch the series, and then sort of finish the arc, and then launch the next arc, and then finish the arc, kind of the way he did in Infinity, you know, that kind of way.
Yeah.
And then Jorge does this incredible kind of connective stuff between with this. He has this kind of electric energy as an artist. And I think they fit perfectly together for what we're trying to do in those issues. Like the way, you know, Jim sets everything up, it's kind of grand and huge. And then Jorge does a lot of the sort of, this is the emotional material and the build towards the end too. And I don't know, I'm very, very excited about it. But like you said, there's a consistency with it where they're my guys throughout.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
There's one other guy that I don't want to announce yet that's coming in to do some stuff when we get past the first arc plus. But
cool.
That'll be good stuff.
Well, we are all very excited for everything coming up. Scott, I want to thank you once again for being on.
No, is there anything else too?
Yeah,
Toby,
I have this last question. We have a gentleman here on this podcast who's usually here who's not here today. He's a big Marvel boy. He has announced that he would like to fight Greg Capullo, which he didn't quite realize what he was saying because we all started laughing and then showed him a picture of him, and then he decided that maybe that was not the smartest thing he would say.
What was the reason? Why was that?
I forgot what he was saying.
It was actually about some art that Greg had done in an issue of Metal, where he's like, these boxy looking hands. They look so. Yeah, he was going off on how boxy the hands looked and.
On like
stuff
one,
like that.
It was like,
it was one panel.
He was well. For reference. Bryce likes to fight Ryan on anything possible. Yes, he does. So if Ryan loves something, it doesn't matter what it is. He might agree with Ryan.
He's my Batman who laughs.
Yeah, yeah. Right? He just goes against anything that Ryan says, even if he actually agrees on the subject matter. So he just went on a riff, and he goes, "How strong could this man possibly be? He's an artist. I will fight that guy." And then we all started laughing because he just challenged the best possible dude he could challenge in the comic book industry.
Well,
do you know what Greg Capullo
play Frank Thierry and just say, if you fight Greg, you fight two men.
Yeah. There you go.
No, it's Toby actually had the question about an influence for the Joker Dragon.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah,
that was Frazetta was the big influence.
Was it? Okay, I was thinking. Okay, well, I was way off then.
No.
I was thinking the Never-Ending Story Dragon.
Oh no, well, I mean, I like the Never-Ending Story too. But no, it was. We wanted it. I mean, it was metal. I wanted it to be something where you were like, this feels like the craziest rock show I've ever been to. And to me, that meant sort of monstrous, demonic,
Yeah,
just sort of out of control, sort of
Guar flying this thing out or something.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Guar, that's awesome.
Scary.
It was very Guar, yeah.
As a random aside into another area of Snyder expertise, I'm going to ask the final question, perhaps.
Yeah, we're done. Yep, that's it. Let's wrap it up.
Scott, are you ready for the HBO Elvis special?
I'm super ready.
I'm so ready. The Searcher, it's called, I believe.
I know, The Searcher. That's right. That's right. And I read reviews of it, like without spoilers in advance. It sounds great. No, I'm always very wary of Elvis stuff because, I remember this New Yorker cartoon once that was like, it was like a ticket window at Graceland, and there were two holes, and one said ironic fan and the other said unironic fan. It was like so true. But I'm like a deeply unironic fan. Elvis meant a lot to me as a kid, still does. I have two Elvis tattoos. I've got like a young Elvis on one shoulder and a mature Elvis on the other shoulder.
Have you named one of the deer Elvis?
I did. Well, my kids are named Jack Presley Snyder and Emmett Aaron Snyder. So if you have the name.
Is mature Elvis also known as slightly paunchy?
No. It's like
karate Elvis?
Well, no, because I feel like people don't know there's like a period between like 1969 and 1973 where Elvis was still like trim and kind of awesome and crazy.
Yeah.
So no, it's like that's the way it is. If you've ever seen that.
Oh yeah. That's the period of Aloha from Hawaii. Also, I think
right before that. Yeah.
Okay.
So he's like thin and kind of karate kung fu awesome. So it's that where he's like it's a Vegas image, but he's like in a karate pose and really limber. It's pretty awesome.
That should be on your Instagram somewhere.
Yeah, I should have posted it a while ago. I don't know. It's like you can't, it was back in the days when you demur about your tattoos or whatever, but I got it when I was like 18 and, 20.
Never be ashamed of your tattoos, man.
Well, now that we have fully hijacked the show.
My parents, it was more like I was a kid, so I didn't want my parents to know I got it. So it was when I was living at home. I was like, in high school and college. So.
Oh, I got my first one and I just showed it to my mom. She's like, "Oh my God!" I'm like, "Yeah, deal with it." And then it just spawned from there. It got to the point where she actually signed her name on me for when I got my mom tattoo done. So they come around.
Yeah, no, they're funny. They're impossible to shake now. Like I've always been like, I'm a writer. You're not supposed to be supportive. And I've tried to shake them at many points. Even when my biggest moment was when I went to right after college, and they were like, if you want to be a writer, you should get a job at a publishing house. And I did all that stuff, and they were sort of like, if you want to do it, you should, work at a magazine or whatever. And I was like, I'm going to go work at the, Weekly World News and Disney World and whatever. And went down there, and I was literally like a janitor at Disney World, and they came down and were so excited. They were like, let's take a picture with you. And in the picture, I'm looking so miserable. Like, my parents are not supposed to be happy with this.
But they were at the happiest place on earth.
I know. They've always been there. So they've always been very supportive. But no, Elvis for me, I was 16, 17. And, I grew up in New York, and it was one of those things where I was like, I want to find something to like that nobody else will like. I don't care what it is. I was like, nobody in New York City will like Elvis. And then I actually really fell in love with it. And the reason was, I was anxious, insecure, teenager who didn't know if I'd ever, make it at what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a comic book artist, comic book writer. And Elvis was this kid that was like poor and had terrible acne and like no reason to believe in himself, but still went to high school dressed like he was already a rock star, like crazy clothes, and played his guitar, and you were like, that's who I want to be, that. So it was a very visceral connection very early, and then I fell in love with so much of the music in that moment, Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and Johnny Cash and all of it, like just the whole Sun Studios and everything. So it's very dear to my heart, all that stuff. So The Searcher, I'm sure I'm very excited to see it.
Yep. So ready.
Well, I must say I like that your musical influence shows through sometimes in your work when you add that little bit to it.
Oh yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of Elvis references hidden and stuff, but also just I love it. The whole thing, like getting into that kind of music early. I realized what I loved about it was the originality and how indigenous it was, like how different the country blue, like not just Elvis, but all that stuff at that moment, like the sort of blend of things that was happening with Little Richard and just all of it, like, and those moments in sort of American musical history, like the early jazz and all of it. Like I fell for all those different things over the years. American Vampire addresses a lot of that stuff. There's always kind of music involved in the series, and we always try and make a playlist for the different eras and that stuff. So, with Batman, it was fun, like doing All Star. I was like, I'm going to try that too, and made like an on the road one. And with metal, we made but it's very much that, that sense of, how I don't know, you can find a confluence between the sort of music that inspires the stuff and the books themselves. So,
isn't Scott on the East Coast?
He is.
I am.
Well, we should say aloha from California at this point.
Well, Scott,
he's gonna curse our names in the morning.
He's a writer. He probably stays up till 4 in the morning.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. What am I saying?
Scott, I'm super excited for everything you talked about today. I'm super excited for everything that's upcoming, and so thank you very, very much for being on.
I'm honestly, I wouldn't bullshit you guys. I wouldn't be like, you know what, this is going to be amazing if I thought it wasn't. But I'm really proud of the stuff coming up at DC. Genuinely, and stuff that you know about, stuff you don't know about yet. I think they've made a lot of really good decisions about things coming up. So
nice,
it'll be good.
Nice. Really looking forward to it.
Do you guys feel like a good enthusiasm among fans too? I'm so in the bubble, it's hard to tell, like the fans, are they excited about sort of No Justice and Justice League and Justice League Dark, Superman and The Wedding? And
we have a new point of sale system here called Comic Hub that you can actually sign people up for. They have a customer app where they can go on and place orders, and it's not just like, hey, wander in and write on a piece of paper and tell us what you want. We're finally getting a little technical here and doing some cooler stuff on the point of sale system.
We're finally catching up.
Yeah, I know. There's an option on there where it says you can contact people that have bought previous issues and sign them up for subscriptions to new titles. So I contacted everyone that bought Dark Knight's Metal and said, hey, you purchased Dark Knight Metal. Scott Snyder is going to continue this into a 4-issue No Justice miniseries, which then continues in the Justice League. We're going to throw the first issue in your box. If you don't want this, let us know. I got one reply from everyone that bought Metal. So I think your Justice League is going to do very, very well. Yes.
Thanks. Well, I'm very glad to know that people are just excited about what we're doing at DC in general, regardless of sales and all that stuff too. It's just,
well, I mean, for me,
just the energy.
If they're not excited, people don't buy it. There will always be that. Every store is going to have 10 people that buy Superman, no matter how good or bad it is, right? I mean, They're all going to have it. When Superman is selling 50, 60 copies, that tells you people are enjoying it. When I'm ordering books in the hundreds, not in the tens, people are excited.
Well, I was working at 2 different stores while Metal was being released, and so it's 2 different types of clientele at both stores. And there was just so much buzz of people that got heard of this Metal thing and then came in and were like, "Oh my God, I want this. I want more." And so I think it's done something to bring a lot of people in that maybe
the 1-2 punch of Metal and Doomsday Clock brought in a lot of people, and Rebirth did too, right?
Well, it's really funny because today one of my, as I call normal friends, actually hit me up and he goes, "Hey man, do you know what this metal thing?" I'm like, "Oh wow, well it's funny you bring this up because we got Scott on the podcast and that maybe you should tune in tomorrow." But he's genuinely interested, and he's a guy that reads comics like once every 5 years or so. Like there's something that piques his interest and he hears something about it on the news, or I don't actually even know where he hears things from, but he's genuinely excited about this metal thing. And this is like after the series has been done, right? So he just heard it from somewhere.
Oh, I'm
glad. Yeah, they're gonna do a second push with the trade, and they're doing the soundtrack. They're gonna announce that whole thing. I know it's crazy.
I love the
T-shirt,
by the way.
Cowbells on
it.
The T-shirt's great.
One thing I think Charlie was a little upset
cool.
about Forge and Casting not being in the
Oh sure. No, they're doing.
No, I just
believe me. Like we had a whole discussion about the trade stuff, and that stuff is like way out of my league. But
we need the compendium. We need the whole omnibus of everything in one book.
Well, I mean,
let him say the plan. Hold on, he's saying the plan.
I don't want to like discourage, or encourage buying one and not the other or any of that stuff. So the first edition is just going to be really the 6 issues that are just me and Greg. The second edition is going to be those 6 issues plus Lost, Wild Hunt, and probably Forge and Casting and Greg's designs. So it'll be much more sort of robust. And then they're going to do kind of an omnibus that has all of the
there we go.
Just everything. Okay. One thing.
So not Charlie. I just needed you to be happy.
Well, all Snyder just told me is I'm going to quadruple dip on this thing.
Well, the first stage, is the beautiful hardcover thing. The paperback that comes out afterwards will be the one that I think has the most complete version of the story without the tie-ins. And then the third will be everything at once. And they'll release the tie-ins as their own trades. So they'll have the Dark Knights as a trade. They'll have Bats Out of Hell plus Gotham's Resistance trade.
When customers have asked about this, they're like, is Dark Knight going to get collected? I said, well, yes, of course, everything does these days. But it'll be collected separately. It'll be collected in a couple bigger versions, and then there will be an omnibus, because that's just how things are collected these days, especially these big events. It will happen.
But hearing it from Scott is reassuring.
It could take a little while to get the version you want, maybe, but it will happen.
Well, they're really, honestly, they want to give you guys the version you want. I think the thing they were nervous about was if we give you here, so you could say, well, I don't want the first one because I don't want only the first 6 issues. I want the 9 issues that comprise the main story kind of more thoroughly, but their thinking isn't it's not predatory. It's essentially they're saying,
right, for
people that want to buy just the 6 issues, that are metal itself, even if that's super bare bones, and it holds together, and I'm proud of it as 6 issues, but it's so tight at that point that there's a lot that you have to kind of imagine happens off panel. That sort of edition, they're saying we don't want to make people buy a book that has, because as a hardcover, if you have a book that has 10 issues in it, that's a $30+ book.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. If you do it as a paperback or whatever they're going to do for the second book, and it's $20, it's the same as the hardcover or whatever it is, but it's, so they're very much trying to, I'm telling you, the spirit of DC with metal, the same way they tried not to kind of overwhelm you with too many books and make it overpriced. And for example, the last issue was 43 pages.
It was really big. Yeah.
And it was still $4.99. That's the kind of book that they could easily and should sell for $5.99 for a profit, given the margin of how many pages it is. But they decided to take all the ads out and just do it as no ads, that $4.99. The spirit of metal was very much how do we make this book $3.99, keep it at price, let people enjoy it, and say thank you? The trades are the same, so they're not trying to game you. Right. They're just trying to figure out, how to give you the options to buy the version you want that gives you the most for your money in some way.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And there'll be the soundtrack stuff and all that too will announce.
So what's the soundtrack stuff? Can you say more about that, or?
Yeah, Scott almost got away until I had to go and bring up Elvis.
Yeah, right. Well, no, they're going to basically they're going to. I don't want to say too much, but there's some bands we're really excited about on it. I asked if I could play like cowbell on one of them at least, and Greg play guitar.
Oh, no way!
Eh. So they were talking about Mastodon, a couple other people that are in it, but it's
wow.
It's they're going to make an announcement and play it at San Diego. So it'll be part of the trade like release stuff.
Oh wow!
So yeah, it's still it's still coming soon. So we're excited.
Oh, super cool! All right,
I think that's it.
All right,
we'll forego our normal outros. We'll just say listen to the rest of this podcast or listen to all our previous episodes if you're hearing this just because of the Scott Snyder bump, and if you're in Sunnyvale, California, come check out Comics Conspiracy, where we record this podcast. And
we've obviously had a lot of people come in the past few days.
Yeah. And you obviously buy everything Scott Snyder does, so continue doing that. And thanks, buy all 3 versions of Metal in trade paperback form, because that's what you have to do.
Well, I would just say also, and please, like the reason that thank you guys for doing what you do, sincerely. I mean, for me and Greg and John and FCO, everybody on the team, but from all of us that do all the books, like from Jim Chung and Jorge and me, like you guys are on Twitter and everywhere, like so enthusiastic about the comics you love. You're very vocal about the things you think should change in the industry. I will give you a ton of credit, and your fans seem really passionate and all of it. So the fact that you were so supportive of metal, but just everything that I've done, and and supportive even if you're not of the stuff I've done, of the industry itself. Just it's such a pleasure to come on and talk to you guys as as openly as I can on this stuff. So I appreciate you having me on, and I'd love to come back soon.
Oh yeah, definitely. Once Justice League gets rolling, we'll have to have you back on to kind of talk that first few issues, see what's going on. So thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you guys.